Good morning, distinguished guests. Let me extend my warmest welcome to all the participants to the opening ceremony of the 2022 Knowledge Sharing Program Dissemination Conference. My name is Claudia Lee, and it is my great honor and pleasure to be here to serve as your MC. First of all, thank you for sharing your valuable time to attend today's conference. This conference will be held under the theme of knowledge sharing towards resilient sustainability, and today we will seek ways to overcome a variety of challenges such as economic uncertainties and climate crises that the world is facing after the COVID-19 pandemic. And we will discuss the direction and role of new forms of knowledge sharing. In the keynote speech, MIT professor Darren Acemoglu will diagnose the global economy that is standing at a decisive turning point for a sustainable future and address the government's inclusive institutions. In the KSP representative performance sharing session, we prepared two presentations on Indonesia's integrated financial management information system and Ecuador's plastic recycling technology. Today's panel discussion will be moderated by Mr. Kyung-Wook Ko, former ambassador of the Republic of Korea to the OECD. And in this session, we plan to propose new opportunity of knowledge sharing beyond crisis and uncertainty. In parallel session 1, speakers will share the main achievements of KSP projects related to green and smart infrastructure conducted in Czechia, Paraguay, and Mozambique, and also introduce a new development cooperation mechanism linked to climate response measures such as the overseas reduction of greenhouse gases. Meanwhile, in parallel session 2, there will be discussions on the performance of major KSP projects that involved cooperation with private companies and on plans to strengthen mid to long-term economic cooperation with partner countries. Now, without further ado, let's officially begin the opening ceremony for the 2022 Knowledge Sharing Program Dissemination Conference. First and foremost, it is my great pleasure to invite Vice Minister of Economy and Finance of the Republic of Korea, Mr. Ki-sun Pang, up for his opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Yeah. 안녕하십니까.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As just introduced, I am Ki-sun Pang, Vice Minister of Economy and Finance of Korea. I would like to sincerely welcome you to the 2022 Knowledge Sharing Program Dissemination Conference. In particular, my thanks go to Professor Darren Acemoglu of MIT, Assistant Minister Sudarto of Finance of Indonesia, delegations from partner countries and international organizations, senior advisors to KSP, and speakers from home and abroad. The Korean government has been running the knowledge sharing program since 2004 to support economic and social development and policy capability of our partner countries based on Korea's experience. Even when the world had come to a stop from the pandemic, KSP was still there to address our partners' issues, going beyond the limitations of time and space. I am particularly pleased that at this year's conference, we can introduce projects from Indonesia and Ecuador, where there were meaningful achievements last year. I hope that today's forum will be a chance to seek new cooperation opportunities and strengthen global partnerships. Distinguished guests, along with over 2 years of COVID-19, we are faced with a number of economic challenges like global supply chain disruptions, commodity price hikes, inflationary pressure, energy and food crises, and financial market fluctuations due to monetary tightening. We're also seeing increasing manifestations of climate change with extreme weather conditions like heat wave, drought, and flooding occurring around the world. These uncertainties and crises of the international community are prompting concerns of our sustainable future. We need to harness our capabilities to enable sustainable future by overcoming such uncertainties and crises. Now, it is in this context that I would like to sum up KSP's role in building the basis for a sustainable future in 3 key words: preparation, participation, and partnership, or 3 Ps. First, preparation. We will prepare for the future. We will strengthen knowledge sharing in the key global issues of today: digital economy and green. First, KSP will actively support the institutional basis that will be the driver of GHG reduction in our partner countries to achieve the upwardly adjusted reduction targets and become a carbon-neutral society. Then we can contribute to the global effort to fight climate change, sustainable development in partner countries, and help Korean companies join the global environment market and solidify our bilateral relations. We will also strengthen knowledge sharing in digital, science and technology, which are global agenda and Korea's comparative advantage. We will lead the global agenda in these fields, like green energy, digital economy, and smart city, by producing a policy guide that summarizes Korea's experience. Second is participation. We will broaden private participation. The rapidly changing global environment and the subsequent challenges are not something that can be dealt with only by the public or private sector or experts alone. In response to this, the MOEF has come up with a process for project proposals by the private sector, where specialized businesses with innovative capability can propose themes for consultation so as to create synergy policymaking and technology in various fields. It allows a one-stop process for private participation from the planning stage, policy consultation, and follow-up implementation. It is also hoped to help build up local networks and overseas expansion of Korean businesses. For partners, it could create opportunities for practical and mutually beneficial cooperation, where there would be a virtuous cycle where investment leads to job creation, infrastructure building, and growth in real economy in both countries. The MOEF will also make adjustments to the consultative body to include private experts in KSP project evaluation so that we can gather ideas from both the private and public sectors. Last is partnership, or collaboration structure where we move forward together. As a global pivotal state, Korea will deepen and broaden partnerships to be the catalyst for economic cooperation based on its technology and innovation. The MOEF will create KSP Plus and expand EIPP to deepen our cooperation with partners. By installing the KSP Plus, which will provide multi-year projects, unlike the KSP's single-year projects, we can flexibly respond to the more sophisticated needs for consultation in legal, human resource development, and infrastructure building. And through EIPP, which provides mid to long-term policy consultation in various topics, we will tighten and broaden our partnerships. We will broaden the horizon of our economic cooperation. We will scale out our KSP partnership with not only traditional ODA countries, but also with middle-income countries based on Korea's higher profile and technology. We will regularize our consultations with international organizations that have well-developed local networks to leverage their expertise and boost cooperation, and extend the IO's role in joint consulting projects from the current project discovery phase to practical advisory as well. Ladies and gentlemen, the keynote speaker, Professor Esmoglu, has emphasized that successful countries are based on inclusive institutions that utilize market potential, promote technological innovation, invest in human development so that anyone can unleash their talent and capabilities. Korea, which is cited as such a success case, now seeks to create a better future for the world together by sharing our knowledge and experience in our inclusive institutions through KSP. This is also the spirit of KSP, which says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. The theme of today's conference, Sustainable Future, is not to be anticipated or predicted. It is to be created by us now. I believe it is our responsibility to future generations for the international community to overcome the uncertainties and crises and seek a better way for the future. I do hope today's conference can help find answers for a sustainable future and inspire us all. Thank you very much for your attention.
For opening today's conference with your insightful remarks. And thank you for sharing excellent strategies that the ministry has adopted that will lead to better outcomes for a greater future. Next, I am pleased to invite the acting president of KDI, Mr. Young-Sun Ko, to the podium for his welcome remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome him with a warm round of applause.
안녕하십니까?
Hello, good morning. First of all, I would like to start by expressing my appreciation to the host of this conference, Vice Minister Bang Gi-sun, and related officials of the Ministry of Economy and Finance. I would also like to extend my gratitude to our keynote speaker, Professor Darren Asmoglu, for joining us in person, as well as all the other speakers and panelists. Welcome. First of all, I would like to thank KDI and Korea Exim Bank and KOTRA and the related officials for putting this event together. Ladies and gentlemen, the world, since the COVID-19 pandemic, has come to confront various risk factors all at the same time. Global supply chain disruptions, a limited fiscal space of the governments, and the energy crisis are the cases in point. Among them, the most prominent crisis is none other than the climate change crisis. In many aspects, climate change is having a real impact on economic activities. It is reported that the world has suffered losses due to natural disasters to the tune of approximately 84 trillion won in the first half of this year. And the World Meteorological Organization, WMO, says that climate-related disasters have incurred economic losses in the 2010s at approximately 8 times higher than that of the 1970s. In addition, the ILO, which is the International Labor Organization, predicts that by 2030, extreme heat will reduce total labor hours in the world by 2.2% and $2.4 trillion in GDP, respectively. Torrential rain floods farmlands and industrial facilities, bringing economic activities to a halt. Drought dries up water in the rivers, resulting in maritime logistics disruptions and power generation issues. However, on the other hand, such crisis emerging on the horizon is being perceived as a new opportunity by some. To secure new growth engines and shift the economic structure in a more sustainable direction, there are moves being made. The European Union has adopted the Green Deal as its new growth strategy and announced around 1 trillion euro funding plan, based on which the EU seeks to promote decarbonization of its economy, create new jobs, and also secure technologies. The United States, for its part, looks to invest $2 trillion in the infrastructure and energy sector reforms. Renewable energy expansion, industrial infrastructure system realignment will be carried out with a view to tackling the climate crisis and nurturing relevant industries and manpower. With the emergence of green taxonomy, investment landscape and trade environment are expected to undergo changes. And in response to this, there are countries and companies that are working to come up with pertinent strategies. In the past, economic development or growth and environmental preservation were often seen as incompatible goals. However, these days, in driving economic growth, securing sustainability is being called for more than ever. The Korean government, in June this year, unveiled its new direction for international development cooperation. And also, as one of the top 10 economies in the world, Korea's international development cooperation is to be carried out in a way that befits its heightened economic status. International development cooperation is to be expanded quantitatively and also qualitatively through the sharing of Korea's development experience and various strengths. By doing so, Korea hopes to render practical assistance to partner countries' development and lead the global agenda towards a more sustainable future. Korea, in a short span of less than half a century, has transformed itself from an agrarian country to a technological leader. During the process of economic growth, domestic and international environments changed rapidly, and the government continued to update its policy paradigm to respond to such changing landscape. Case in point is the Asian financial crisis of 1997 that resulted in economic reforms of the country. However, in the 1960s and 70s, we had the government-led industrialization, and in the 80s, fiscal consolidation and macroeconomic stabilization. And in the 1990s, we had globalization. In 2000, social safety net expansion, and in 2010, sustainable development framework adoption. They all illustrate the strong capacity of the Korean government to respond to changes. And such experience of Korea can be best transferred to partner countries through knowledge sharing. 40 years ago in 1982, KDI began International Development Exchange Program, or IDEP, through which it had invited key personnel from partner countries to share Korea's experience in economic growth. And 20 years later, in 2004, KSP was officially launched and has come to work with some 90 countries around the world, covering about 1,400 themes for policy consultation projects. KSP is the Republic of Korea's representative brand for knowledge cooperation. It is aimed at effectively transferring Korea's experience to help partner countries in their response to crises and also build their fundamental development capacity, with the ultimate goal of steering the international community towards the path of sustainable growth. I hope this conference will help enhance the effectiveness of KSP and strengthen the role of KSP by bringing in various views, thereby laying the basis for KSP to make further progress. I would like to thank the participants once again for their time here, and I look forward to your continued keen interest in KSP. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Acting President Ko, for your remarks as well. We were able to see the key role that KSP has been playing in the history of the Korean government. And now we would like to move on to today's keynote speech by an economist, Dr. Darren Acemoglu. He is currently a professor in the Department of Economics at MIT and was awarded the John Bates Clark Medal 2019, one of the most prestigious American Economist Awards, which is awarded to outstanding American economists under the age of 40, and which also precurses often a Nobel Prize. Now, please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Professor Darren Acemoglu.
It's wonderful to be here. It's my honor to be following the Vice Minister and the President of the KDI to talk about the important issues that this conference is focusing on. And I thought a good way of framing the challenges for facing the world, and Korea in particular, but even more importantly the world, is to think about how the threats against economic success and prosperity will evolve throughout the 21st century. And I think there's little doubt in my mind that we are at a turning point. There are some unique challenges affecting much of the world: climate change, inequality, aging populations combined with mass migration that will probably be the outcome of climate change, end of globalization and emergence of a new world order, and technological changes that are underpinning, but at the same time, changing the nature of many of the social and economic compacts that existed in the world. With these new challenges, it is natural to be looking for new ideas and new theories. But I'll argue some elements of what James Robinson and I emphasized in Why Nations Fail are still relevant, but we need to also introduce new ways of thinking in order to counter these amazing challenges. The main basis of the work that James and I did is that in order to build peace and prosperity, we have to start with institutions. And how to develop these institutions and what the nature of these institutions should be, of course, is the main topic that I want to spend a little bit of time on. But before I do that, I think for Korean audiences, I don't need to belabor the importance of institutions, because I think it provides Korea's history provides one of the most vivid illustrations of the role of institutional differences. This map that many of you, of course, have seen shows South Korea and North Korea at night, and you see North Korea is in the dark because of essentially lack of economic activity, whereas South Korea is very brightly illuminated, showing both the economic prosperity of its citizens even near the border and throughout the country, and also the extent of economic activity even at night. And the reason why the Korean experience is so telling is that it clearly demonstrates that some of the other major ideas that have been proposed by thinkers, historians, and philosophers over the last 500 years are not going to cut it when it comes to explaining this big contrast between North Korea and South Korea. It's not in the geography of the two places that are very similar. It's not, of course, in the culture. At the time of the separation of the two countries at the 38th parallel, Korea was unusually homogeneous in terms of language, ethnicity, culture, and it also wasn't in some sort of economic history dependence, because if anything, North Korea was slightly more industrialized. But since then, there is a gap of between 10 to 15-fold that has opened up between South Korea and North Korea. We're not entirely sure, as you know, because there are no national statistics from North Korea. The way that James and I try to make sense of the Korean experience and the broader world experience that we talk about at length in the book is that you need to think of two polar extremes, what we call extractive economic institutions and inclusive economic institutions. The name extractive is not chosen by default. It has a particular meaning. We want to emphasize that these institutions are designed around extracting resources and labor from the majority of the population for the benefit of a small minority, a small elite. That elite could be Communist Party bosses, it could be oligarchs, it could be an aristocracy. It's not the identity of the elite that matters. It could be even a business tycoon and his surroundings. But it is the fact that the whole economy is organized around this type of extraction. In contrast, inclusive economic institutions provide a level playing field, much greater opportunities for the population at rights, secure property rights, and also the necessary public services and public goods that will further contribute to this level playing field. And that's very important, and I'm going to come back to that. It's really a partnership between the private sector and the public sector that is at the heart of the inclusive institutions, and hitting the balance between the private and the public is one of the challenging aspects. But I want to spend quite a bit of my time today. I don't have much time, and I have a lot I want to share, but the majority of that time I'm going to talk about the political aspects of this problem, because democracy, I think, is going to be one of the very important nexus for international cooperation, and it's one of the very important pillars of inclusive economic in political institutions, and it is under threat. So the idea that James and I emphasize is that extractive economic institutions are often undergirded by extractive political institutions that concentrate political power in the hands of a small group. So while economic institutions concentrate economic opportunities in the hands of a small group, political institutions do the same for political power. And inclusive institutions, in contrast, that go much better with inclusive economic institutions, so there's a synergy between inclusive political and inclusive economic institutions, and they tend to distribute political power more broadly in society and introduce formulated institutional and norm-based constraint on how that power is organized. Inclusive political institutions need to be based on some type of democracy. Democracy isn't sufficient for inclusive political institutions. You can have majoritarian democracies where power fluctuates from one group to another, and that power is then exercised without constraints in a bad way. But without democracy, with a junta, with a dictatorship, with an aristocracy, it's almost impossible to build inclusive institutions. So the question then becomes, how do you further democratic institutions? And even more importantly, how do you protect them in the face of the types of challenges that we are facing today? So I've already emphasized societal participation in politics, and I've already emphasized strong but firmly shackled state institutions that create trust between society and state. These issues are the topic of my more recent book with James Robinson, The Narrow Corridor, States, Societies, and the Fate of Liberty. And again, South Korea is a very useful case study from which we have a lot to learn, especially because it was one of the very successful cases of transition from dictatorship to democracy. It has worked very hard in building elements of shared prosperity, for example, by trying to manage the balance between the power of big businesses, but also opportunities for small businesses and for workers. And also it illustrates how difficult that road, that path is. And let me just, without further ado, just introduce one picture which summarizes the main ideas of the narrow corridor. And we reduce everything. It's a simplification, but it's a useful one for sort of having this global view of history. We reduce everything to two elements: power of the state and power of society. By power of the state, we mean the ability of the state to both provide public services but also to suppress dissent, repress society if necessary. And power of society is the ability of groups outside of the state to organize in the form of collective action, sometimes norm-based, sometimes through protest, sometimes through democratic means. And we think that the balance between power of state and society is really the key for understanding the building of inclusive institutions and their resilience in the face of challenges. When you have an imbalance between state and society, you have the paths that we sort of show at the two ends. The one at the top is what we call the despotic leviathan, and one simple example of that is China, where over the last 2,500 years, state power has been overwhelming relative to the ability of society to organize independently of the state. And that despotic leviathan further weakens state-society imbalance, further weakens society, and it leads to a path in which society becomes more and more impaired. At the bottom, we show weak institutions or absent state institutions, many pre-colonial and sometimes post-colonial African societies, but also several in South Europe and the Middle East, are examples of very weak state institutions. There are well-defined collective action channels in these societies, but the absence of state institutions mean public services are lacking, economic security is very difficult to maintain. The middle is what gives the name to the book, the narrow corridor. So here you have a balance between state and society, but what this figure really emphasizes is that that's a process, it's a path. You don't overnight build state institutions that foster trust, and you don't overnight build the ability of society to counter that state's demands when necessary. It is a very long, circuitous path, and the narrowness of the corridor, which is what I try to represent in this figure and is in the title of the book, is a critical idea because it shows how fragile that balance is. And in particular, when there are big shocks that change either the nature of the economic system or the specific challenges that the state has to deal with, there is a veritable danger of a society moving out of the corridor. And that's what we have experienced throughout the 19th and 20th centuries in many instances, as we discuss in the book, and I think that is the danger that we are confronting today. And within that light, I want to talk about democracy. Because again, if you start from a society like South Korea or the UK or France or the US, if you start weakening democracy, you're making it much more likely that you're going to go out of that corridor. And democracy's path over the last 50, 60 years is a very interesting one, because in 1960, only 30% of the world's countries were classified as democratic, and things had started changing already by the 1970s after what the political scientist called the political scientist Samuel Huntington called the third wave, and the number of democracies started increasing. Even in 1989, another political scientist, Francis Fukuyama, sort of predicted that this was the end of history in the sense that there will be no more serious struggle between democratic institutions and alternatives because democracy had prevailed. And indeed, by 2000, the number of democracies around the world had risen to 60% of countries. Of course, many important exceptions in Asia, such as China, Vietnam, Cambodia, but many countries around the world, including Latin America and Africa, had already become democracies. But since 2006, we see something very strikingly different. Since 2006, in every year, we have more countries abandoning democratic institutions or making their democratic institutions weaker than the other way around. So what's going on? Why this democracy's plight? And is it really important? Perhaps you don't buy my theory of why nations fail in the narrow corridor, and you're actually wondering why put democracy in such center when we are dealing with existential challenges such as climate change and international cooperation. Well, indeed, if you go back in history, you will see that many people, many of the leading Western philosophers doubted, and many of the Eastern philosophers, by the way, doubted that democracy was such a good system. Aristotle and Plato were both skeptical of democracy, seeing it as a form of mob rule. Many of the leading political scientists and economists who thought about this actually said, well, perhaps democracy is not so important. Well, I'm arguing that it's very important as a foundational institution, but in fact, even more than that. Democracy is good for economic growth, and I want to show that. So it's actually sort of surprising that there is so much controversy because the data actually are very clear. So here what I'm showing you is the GDP per capita of countries that start out as non-democratic over the post-war period. And for each country that starts out as democratic and then transitions to democracy, I put them at 0. So 0 here is the year of democratization, and then I compare that country to others who were non-democratic and remain non-democratic in the same year. So there's no statistical procedure, nothing complicated, this is just the raw data. And what you see is that starting from 0 at the bottom, if you go forward, in the next 10 years, you're already getting quite a bit more growth in democracies than their non-democratic partners. And in the course of about 20-25 years, democracies have added to their GDP 25 percentage points more than those that remain non-democratic. So that is the first thing that I want to emphasize. There is really a very clear pattern in the data not when you compare, say, China to Switzerland, those kind of comparisons are not very meaningful, but when you compare the same country, say South Korea before it democratized to South Korea after it democratized, there is a big dividend of economic growth. But the second point is also visible from the figure. Before democratization, you have a big drop. Where is that coming from? Well, it's coming from the fact that non-democracies are always a threat, and they never leave, well, they rarely leave in their own accord. Many non-democratic regimes make way for democracy in the midst of economic crisis because they lose legitimacy. This is just the raw data. If you apply statistical techniques, it should show exactly the same thing in a much more precise form. You see again at 0 is the year of democratization. Following democratization, you have very rapid economic growth. So, but I don't want to get into the statistical details, but there's one more picture that I want to show you because it illustrates the main ideas and also references the South Korean case. Here is the data, the year-to-year differences from the 70 years of data or 60 years of data that we have across 150 countries. And what I have pointed out here are the points that refer to South Korea. So the South Korean data before democratization is in red, after democratization is in orange. And the South Korean case is sometimes presented in the Western media and popular discussions as an example of rapid economic growth under dictatorship and authoritarian regimes. But actually, when you look at this data, you see very clearly that the South Korean growth received a big boost after democratization, except the 1 year related to the East Asian crisis. The orange lines are almost uniformly, orange points are almost uniformly higher than the red points. So today's economic growth in South Korea, and it has many, many important impressive elements. Of course, weaknesses, we'll talk about them as well. But this would not have been possible, I think, in my opinion, without building inclusive institutions, and with inclusive institutions really necessitated democracy. It's not just economic growth. If you want to make economic growth broadly shared, you have to, again, turn to democratic institutions. You see the same thing in education, but I'm just showing you for health. It's the same figure. 0 is the year for democratization, and now I'm looking at what happens to infant mortality. So there's a big drop in infant mortality, and when you look into the details, it's very clear democracies start investing in health, especially for their poor citizens. But all of this notwithstanding, democracy in the midst of major challenges. We are experiencing political polarization everywhere, and this is related to some of the other existential challenges that we are facing: inequality, technology, the role of China, social media, which is another aspect of technology. Inequality, I think, is really striking. Korea has been less affected by inequality, although there are major concerns. But throughout the West, inequality has turned into a real existential risk. In the US, for example, just to remind some of you who may not have seen a picture like this, the pattern is truly striking. So here I'm showing the real wage growth for US men by education level. And before the 1970s, you have this period of shared growth where the real wages for all demographic groups was growing more or less at the same rate, actually a very, very rapid rate, similar to what South Korea experienced in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, 2.5 percentage points a year. But then from around 1980 onwards, you have this very striking change. Not only inequality is increasing, but actually real wages at the bottom of the distribution for workers with high school degree, even for workers with some college, are dropping quite rapidly. Only workers with postgraduate degrees are experiencing real wage gains. This is really a striking pattern that, of course, is not unrelated to the rise of right-wing populism in the form of Trump and his allies at the moment. Inequality is not just a US phenomenon. If you look at a measure like Gini, it has increased in all industrialized nations, although US is unique in terms of the decline in the real wages at the bottom because it does not have strong minimum wages or protection for workers. Another pattern, which is going to link this to the technology challenges I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes, is that if you look at the countries for which I have data, you see that in all of them, you have a similar evolution of the industrial structure of employment. So in particular, occupations, employment in occupations that used to be in the middle of the distribution, the bedrock of the middle class, blue-collar jobs, clerical jobs, office jobs, they have all been declining. So the red refers to these middle third of occupations, and you see that employment in all of these middle occupations have been declining in relative terms throughout the OECD, increasing either in low-wage or high-wage technical occupations. This inequality, I think, has arrived at a really bad time for the health of democracy and the future of institutions, because it arrived precisely when aspirations were high. Aspirations were high for very natural reasons. Democracy, for all of its benefits, has also one danger. It increases aspirations. So many countries become democratic, aspirations are rising. But more importantly, or equally importantly, we have all been promised much better outcomes because of globalization and technological change. And when inequality and the type that what I showed in the US and the UK, you see the same thing. In Germany, you see the same thing. Real wages either flat or declining for a large fraction of the population. That really is jarring for aspirations. But it's not just an industrialized world problem. In the developing world, too, aspirations were very high, again, because of the promises of globalization, democratization, cultural integration in the world. And many people felt that even if inequality did not increase as much in every developing country, the promise had not been realized. But there might be even deeper threats to democracy. In the late 1990s, early 2000s, people were talking about how social media, online communication were going to democratize everything. But by now, we have really reached the opposite conclusion. Many people are thinking now that new technologies have become a veritable threat to democracy. This is easy to see in China, for example, where facial recognition cameras and record-keeping, online and offline censorship have been all much strengthened using new technological tools, and perhaps it's epitomized by the social credit system, where the whole life of an individual can be kept under control because we are so much better at keeping records than what individuals are doing. So in the midst of these sort of situation, some have started wondering whether technology is creating a world of dictatorships. Now you see the two aspects of technology. On the one hand, increasing inequality. On the other hand, weakening democracies and strengthening authoritarian regimes. And this is not just a China story, but China plays its critical role here. For example, recent research by several academics documents that China is not just itself become a leader in developing surveillance technologies, but is actually exporting them to other authoritarian countries. Huawei, for example, has exported surveillance technologies developed by government-sponsored research to more than 50 countries over the last 10 years. And social media is playing a particularly important role in these developments because it is the other end of the stick, so to speak. On the one hand, we have new digital tools strengthening the hands of governments, especially authoritarian governments, but perhaps we can also improve communication among civil society actors. That was the hope. But with social media, exactly the opposite has happened. Social media has degraded the quality of political discourse, especially attention-seeking by major platforms, because it's dictated by their business model. You have to get people's attention so that you can offer them digital ads and make money, but also just the general ability that many populist leaders have developed in order to use social media to polarize the nation even further. And you see this in Erdogan in Turkey, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Narendra Modi in India. In all cases, a special blend of nationalism and right-wing populism has really gotten much energy from social media dynamics. And also, social media has played an important role, of course, in the rise of Western right-wing movements. So the question that I want to end with is whether the future of democracy is bleak and what we can learn from successful experiences, where I would place Korea, and this is relevant for the knowledge-sharing efforts. So I think the dangers that I have talked about should not be minimized, but I don't see the future as bleak, and in fact I don't see it as bleak because there's a lot of agency in the hands of people, in the hands of governments that want to strengthen democratic institutions. And I think the best example for that I see is climate change. It is another one of the existential challenges, but it also highlights that we have made important progress. Today, if you look at comprehensive cost estimates, renewable energy is as cheap as fossil fuel-based energy. This has come a lot because of major pressure on governments from civil society, so democratic institutions have been important. But the next stage is even more critical because international cooperation, which is facilitated by democratic governance, is going to be critical in going forward, both in the adoption of these renewable technologies and developing new elements of the technological infrastructure, for example, in storage. And this also highlights a major theme that is central to narrow corridor, and I think is going to be important moving forward, which is that technology is a set of opportunities. It does not dictate whether technology is going to make you more like a dictatorship or less like a dictatorship. It provides opportunities. So if you look at similar challenges that faced, for example, many societies in the centuries between the 15th and the 17th centuries, you see that when they were faced with these different challenges, they responded to them very differently, depending on their history and depending on this agency. So the rise of mass armies made Prussia abandoned its medieval democratic institutions and became much more oppressive, but it encouraged Switzerland to build much more democratic institutions. So this is the way that we advocate in narrow corridor, how to think about technology, how to think about shocks in general, including demographic shocks such as aging and climate change. And I think it's very relevant for turning around whether technology is going to be pro-shared prosperity and it's going to be about pro-democracy. And There is a lot that can be done. I don't want to spend more time, and I want to open it up for questions, but we can build better technologies for better jobs. I think this is one of the very important lessons that we can learn from South Korean industrialization in the face of demographic change. We can build better globalization, better use of communication technologies, and I think lessons from South Korea, I think South Korea illustrates the true lessons, because it has not been an easy process of building shared prosperity. It has not been an easy process, for example, transitioning from an economy dominated by chaebols to one in which there is better wage growth and better opportunities and more competitive environment. It has not been easy to build democratic institutions either in South Korea, but I think all of these arduous paths are exactly what the world has to learn. And I think the other important element is that, according to my interpretation, South Korea has always been committed to international cooperation, and I think that is going to be really critical, because we need international cooperation more than ever, and we need new international institutions to foster that international cooperation, which will have to start with democracy at home. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your outstanding presentation. And now I would like to move on to the conclusion of today's opening ceremony. Thank you very much. Let's have another round of applause for our keynote speaker. This brings us to the end of the opening ceremony, and we will continue with a commemorative photo opportunity. After the photo opportunity, presentations on key achievements of KSP will resume at 9:40 a.m. Now, please allow me to invite up guests of honor to the stage for a photo opportunity. Please. Now, I would like to invite up the speakers of the session and the key achievements of the KSP. We will have two honorable speakers for the session, and the first speaker is the Assistant Minister for Organization, Bureaucracy, Information and Technology, Mr. Sudarto of the Ministry of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia. He will deliver a presentation on initial research towards enhancing Indonesia's integrated financial management information system. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to invite him over to the stage. Distinguished guests, please join me in welcoming him with a big hand.
Very good morning. First of all, I would like to thank to Ministry of Economic and Finance, KDI, and KFIS, Professor Zhang, Professor Kang, Professor Bai, and others who make this KSP this year very successful. The topic is very timely, about the initial research toward enhancing Indonesia integrated financial information system. I'm sorry to take you into very detailed discussion, while previously in the opening remark, this very macro issue discussed by all of us. However, in the last 2 years, I think we all have very challenging experience. We have to manage, especially our public finance in every country, which must be very flexible to cope with pandemic COVID. And at the end, we have issue because of Croatian war, and now we have issue as well related to climate change and others. And we expect that as Professor Darren mentioned, the future is still uncertain. So, for coping with that, we have to have very good public financial management system, and integrated financial information management is the bottom line, the foundation to make public financial management better and better. FMIS Indonesia, I think it has very successfully support public financial management in Indonesia. It's shown by, it's a bit unique in Indonesia because our public financial report is audited by Supreme Audit, and we are given unqualified opinion of the last 5 years because of our IFMIS. And then during the last 2 years, to cope with pandemic COVID, this system really able to flexible manage our budget, and then just to give you example, it could transfer to the end beneficiaries to more than 50 million families. I think it's around more than 1,030 people in the form of direct transfer or conditional direct cash transfer, in terms of new training, in terms of other subsidy to cope with the pandemic COVID. And Indonesia, quote unquote, is a very rich country. We have more than 70,000 islands. We have more than 10,000 ethnic with different languages. And obviously, it gives different challenges compared to Korea, that very homogeneous. We are very heterogeneous countries. Sorry, I forgot to push the button. This is Indonesia. And then, yes, that poses challenge to us, as I I have mentioned before. Our IFMIS, we implemented just 7 years ago. And I think it's time to rethink, revisit, and I think to enhance the performance of our IFMIS. And then during the consultation with Korean counterpart, data analytic, micro fiscal management become very, very essential for better management of public finance. As well, institutional setting, as Professor Darren mentioned, the relationship between all institutions related to public finance is very important. In case of Indonesia, I think we have different agencies who manage the procurement, different agencies who manage transferring the social assistance to a population. I think this gives different challenges. However, there's opportunity that technology-wise already there. However, we have to simplify this process, as well as in the bottom line is it is a must for the government to efficiently process their all operation, and digital technology really give the opportunity to do that. And then the most important thing is, as Professor Darren mentioned, is about collaboration. Collaboration among institutions is very, very important, and I think collaboration with other countries, as we are doing this morning, knowledge sharing program is very important as well, because no need to invent the new wheel if you could find in other places. Next, the outcome of the KSP this year, I think it gave some very good key recommendation. I think we're grouping into 3. One is institutional reform agenda for IFMIS development. The first is revisiting again the coverage of public financial management, which is covered by integrated financial information management system. Again, if we want to better management in public finance, it is impossible if not supported by integrated financial information management system. And I think deeply in Korea and our system is SPAN and SAKTI. I think one example that this system, we have to have more agile, more robust system, especially to face the uncertainty in the future. And data analytics is very important. And second, about IFMIS development strategy, institutional setting, I think very important because the relationship between agency become very critical when we have to define new process business, when we have to define interface between system and so on. And obviously, technology have two phases. Yeah. Professor Darren mentioned this is the risk, post-risk for the democracy, but we government need technology. It is impossible for us to delivering good cash, goods and services directly to end beneficiary without having technology, without having digital identity for the people. In the last 2 years, for example, we have, I think the same as in Korea, we have to analyze the mobility of people to prevent the spread of COVID-19. We have the system. Again, this is two sides of the technology. I think we government need technology wisely to implement government policy intervention, for example, in the last 2 years to coping with the pandemic COVID. Next is about the advanced technology for next generation of IFMIS, and there's discussion technically about the using codes, commercial of the sales system that already available in the market, or local developed software. The most important is not about codes or local developed software. The most important is, do we able to simplify the process business? Do we able to do change management during the implementation of the system, and many other things. So there need very deep consideration when we invest in this kind of technology. Again, if government invests in ICT, it must be very expensive and it is very risky. That's why deep consideration, very good project management needed to make this successful. And don't forget, it takes time. Yeah, it takes time. With this policy recommendation, we are planning some action to further implement this policy recommendation. Some we outline here, for example, like conducting very comprehensive assessment of the existing public financial coverage, quality of the existing performance budgeting, as well as I think, implementing a very good accrual accounting. We have cash budgeting and we have accrual accounting for budget execution. However, we have to develop our managerial accounting to see, for example, comparing the efficiency of one agency to another agency. This is, I think, one venue to enhance our accounting system. Next is about, obviously, micro fiscal management framework and other data analytics. Now, everything now become digital, everything become the data. I think it's time everybody to do deep analysis, data analytics to better public policy development. Next, about the related to IFMIS development strategy, obviously about proper assessment on the institutional setting, comparing to Korean practice and Indonesian practice, and I believe in other countries is very, very important. Yes, every country have their uniqueness, but I think we have some common understanding how to make the public investment, integrated financial management successful. And then in terms of a more technical level, about, for example, related to microservices, cloud, RPA, robotic processing automation, I think is must in the future, and it is time to do that. And the last is about at the end, I think change management is very, very important, because in terms of Indonesia, we have our system cover 19,000 spending units across Indonesia. It related to more than 250,000 users. So change management, if you change something, change technology, change process business, at least we have to think about 250,000 users that impacted by the changes. This is a big thing, big consideration. And As I said before, Indonesia is a rich country. In terms of ICT literacy, it's very different from area to area. However, we have very good internet network across Indonesia up to now. To wrap up, this KSP knowledge sharing program, I think it's very good. Collaboration among countries is very good because we could learn each other. And I think this event, like in this room, to change idea, to exchange idea, to exchange experience, I think it's very good because, as I mentioned before, no need. We have invent our own will if we could learn from each other. And some idea for next knowledge sharing program, I think we could enlarge, we could revisit again about the optimum institutional setting, how to optimize the mismanagement and benefit of IT investment. Again, IT investment is very expensive, very risky, and mostly it took very long time to implement. And in case of Indonesia, it's always related to more than 250,000 users. The real user, it's serving the whole population of Indonesia. Right now, we have 275 million population. And then, obviously, the usage of the frontier technology. The last 2 years, we have seen technology-wise grow very quickly. And in terms of ICT, today we invest, next year there is new technology. This is very risky. That's why the collaboration, exchange information, exchange knowledge about implementing the latest technology could be implemented to IFMIS. I think this is very, 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 very critical. Obviously, in the micromanagement, exchange knowledge, exchange experience on the project management is very, very important. And I believe this is kind of skill that managing big projects is very, very not very easy. It is very difficult. Data analytic, the progress in data analytic technology, data analytic method is very, very fast in the last 2 years. I think exchange knowledge in this area is very, very, very important. Cybersecurity now has become very critical. I believe every country has experience on the cybersecurity. And this cybersecurity cannot be handled by one country because another country, you know, the cyber attack mostly come from other country. So we have to collaborate to handle this cybersecurity issue. I think lastly about accounting, yeah. Accounting continue to be, we have always new way how to account something, yeah. And financial management, financial accounting, I think become very important. And I think technology-wise, the role of technology become very important to make the accounting system, or in general term, to make the government operation become more efficient, but still accountable. I think that's all my presentation. Again, thank you very much for this very good KSP, and we really expect that we will have this knowledge sharing program or other collaboration in the future in various topics. Thank you very much. Very good morning.
Thank you very much for sharing all the details and key lessons from the Indonesian KSP project. Next, we will have the second presentation by Mr. Alfonso Abdo, Deputy Minister of Production, Foreign Trade, Investments and Fisheries of the Republic of Ecuador. He'll deliver a presentation on efficient production technology, methods, and innovative machinery for recycling products based on expanded polystyrene and polypropylene.
Good morning. On behalf of the Ecuadorian Ministry of Production, Foreign Trade, Investment, Fisheries, I give my heartfelt words of friendship to you all, and I would also like to thank the Republic of Korea. Korea, through KSP Project and KOTRA, has transferred and shared its knowledge and technological process that Korean plastic companies use. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the First Vice Minister of the Economy and Finance, Bang Gi-sun, and also Acting President of KDI, Ko Young-sun, and Professor Darren Acemoglu of MIT. Korea's knowledge in recycling industry has been shared with Ecuador through the KSP, which is also directly related to our public policies. First, the 2021-2025 plan for the creation of opportunities in Ecuador has taken into consideration KSP outcomes. And the same goes for the Framework Act on the rationalization, reuse, and reduction of single-use plastics. This project was initiated at the request of the Ministry of Production, Foreign Trade, Investment, and Fisheries on September 4, 2019, in order to discover efficient production processes through the incorporation of innovative technologies and machinery for the recycling of plastic products. While receiving technical support to move towards a more efficient and sustainable economy and comply with various provisions of regulations specified in the law and to provide relevant support to that end. We came to realize that the industry and the country as a whole faced various challenges. For example, we must comply with the ratio of recycled materials content included in various products. We also must progressively reduce at source the single-use plastics available on the domestic market. And to promote the reduction of pollution by waste and plastic wastes, especially in rivers, seas, lakes, and lagoons. Just as the industry has regulations to comply with, Ecuador as a country also has many important challenges to overcome. For example, the country needs to develop new investments and infrastructure for the recollection and processing of plastic wastes. We must promote the reduction of plastic wastes through its use through recycling and industrialization. And also, to establish a more efficient method of recycling, we must promote technology transfer and seek advice to gain access to new knowledge. As major outcomes of the KSP, waste sorting, separation, and collection methods will be established. We will also promote exchanges with the municipalities and the Ministry of the Environment of Ecuador to promote recycling actions. And also to foster interactions between relevant stakeholders. Given the population distribution of the country, we can establish at least 12 collection centers for recyclable materials. Lastly, through the extended producer responsibility system, we will be able to secure funding for recycling. Such direction and support are expected to generate various effects. One of the impacts includes key decision makers to gain knowledge of the techniques, methods, and technologies used for the industrialization of plastic wastes handled by developed countries, as in the case of the Republic of Korea. Also, in Ecuador, for more advanced plastic recycling technology development and introduction, we can analyze potential new investment needed, through which we can contribute to stronger compliance with the relevant laws. Not only that, Samsung, LG, SK, and other world-class companies' virgin polymer materials can be imported into the country so as to promote development of the plastic industry. And our ministry's plastic cluster initiative will be able to pick up even greater momentum for implementation. Lastly, we can expand various public policies and projects executed to boost the sector. Next, let's take a look at our direction for fostering cooperation going forward. As we have competitiveness in plastic separation and collection, our municipalities will be encouraged to establish pilot plans for waste separation and collection. In addition, to establish national plastic waste management plan that contains the vision towards industrialization of plastic waste. And lastly, as we identify the existence of composite materials that can come from recycled plastics, we will need to analyze non-traditional products that such diverse recycled materials can be used for, and for this goal, cooperation with the academia will be critical. Of the lessons learned, I want to emphasize the following points. There are several challenges for Ecuador regarding the incorporation of technologies within the waste industrialization processes and the development of public policies aimed at the separation of waste at the source. These challenges will allow the country to move towards a more circular economy and inclusive recycling of plastic, and develop a more sustainable model. Lastly, it is important to make a good use of extended producer responsibility system. This is to minimize environmental pollution and encourage producers to be more accountable and responsible for the collection, recycling, remanufacturing, and design of their products. And this will lead to more significant progress. I'd like to take this chance to thank KOTRA once again and for their cooperation in helping us identify potential funding sources for investment projects. Thank you for all your support. And your support will enable us to develop the relevant industry, thereby establishing a more efficient production process and sustainable technology. Thank you very much. I hope you have a good day.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Abdo, for your informative presentation. And this brings us to the conclusion of key achievements of the KSP presentations, and we will continue with a panel discussion in 10 minutes after a short break. Thank you for your cooperation. Welcome back, distinguished guests. Now we will begin a panel discussion under the title of New Opportunity of Knowledge Sharing Beyond Crisis and Uncertainty. And Mr. Kyung-woo Ko, the former ambassador of Korea to the OECD, will lead the session as the chair. Now let me invite all the speakers and participants to the stage. Yes. And today's event is joined by a number of online participants. To those of you who are joining us online, you can ask questions by clicking the Ask Question feature on the interface during the conference. Please feel free to leave your message if you have any questions for the speakers. Now, I would like to ask the former ambassador of Korea to the OECD, Mr. Ha, to take the floor. Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor and pleasure to be a moderator for this important session. This morning, we started by hearing very inspiring speech by Dr. Acemoglu. And if I may summarize it, I guess we are all flattered here in Korea that he started by the example of South and North Korea in the night, and you can see what difference we can make between having an inclusive institution and extractive institution. And then he said, this inclusive institution and democracy is now facing many challenges. And then he ended by saying, international cooperation can provide a good opportunity to face and overcome these challenges. And I guess it is in that spirit that we hold this session and hear about all these different KSP experiences in the spirit of international cooperation. You know, global pandemic has transformed the world fundamentally. The great catch-up by emerging economy has reversed, and the gap between the rich and the poor has widened across and within the nations. The situation has made the effective ODA and knowledge sharing all the more important. There are so many challenges, and they are multiple and complicated. And navigating these challenges requires pooling our resources and wisdom together. And it is in that spirit that KSP is about. And today, let me talk a little bit about housekeeping. As you can see, we have 7 distinguished panelists, so that it can be a little bit crowded. So that I will ask all the panelists to observe their time. You can see the time limit over there. I hope that, to have some remaining time for discussion and entertain some of the questions. I hope we can make it as short as possible. But I'm sure that, the shorter, I might ask you to observe your time, but you can also be given a time later to discuss and answer your questions. So without further ado, let me start by inviting Mr. Hector from Swedish Embassy. Mr. Hector?
Thank you very much. Is it okay if I take off the mask? Yeah. There's not a lot of people very close. Thank you. Good tip. Thank you. So, somebody will be switching the images for me, the slides, or I have a clicker?
The presenters will be staying on the podium.
Okay.
And so can you come up to the stage?
Oh, okay, sure. All right. Okay, this is good. Very nice to meet you, everybody. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we all know about the urgency to avoid a climate catastrophe. There's supposed to be something happening on this image. Okay, there's supposed to be very ominous smoke coming on this image, and you're supposed to be really scared of it. We know about the urgency to act to avoid the climate catastrophe. We need to rapidly cut carbon emissions by half by 2030 to stay below 1.5 degree rise in temperature. And we need to be carbon neutral by 2050 or sooner, definitely sooner. Many actors in my country have a sense of urgency that comes in part from the real dangers of the climate change, but also from the opportunity that are presented in this time of change. Transition to low-carbon industries, low-carbon manufacturing and products present opportunities for innovation. By being the first with a successful transition, you can get a competitive advantage. The world is changing, and markets everywhere will eventually accept only low-carbon products or zero-carbon products or negative carbon products. If you can offer that, you can have a comparative advantage. Sweden have practiced reduction of carbon emissions for several years now. I know that some still believe that carbon reduction has a negative effect on economic growth. That's not the experience that we have in Sweden. Now all slides disappeared. Oh, there's the smoke. Thank you very much. Okay, we're moving on now. Moving on. So greenhouse gas emissions have been going down in Sweden in the last 30 years, and at the same time, our GDP have increased. Carbon to the air have reduced by 32%, while GDP have increased by 89%. It is possible, and this is the direction that we want to continue. The objective for Sweden is to become the first fossil-free welfare nation. The welfare of our society is very important to us, and we will not bargain that. And we intend to be fossil-free by 2045, and we are on our way. That's the backstory to why Sweden last year became the first country to produce fossil-free steel. Steel production is a huge source for carbon emissions in our country, about 11% of all greenhouse gas emissions. A joint undertaking called HYBRIT, which is short for Hydrogen Breakthrough Iron-Making Technology, was undertaken by major actors in Swedish steel industry vertical and have been working since 2015 to transition to a hydrogen-based steelmaking. Last year, Volvo Trucks became the first customer and completed the value chain from mining to manufacturing with a fossil-free dumpster truck. This was made possible by collaboration in cross-sectional innovation between a mining company, an energy company, and a steelmaker, all in Sweden. Today, there are similar undertakings to produce green steel, including in South Korea. Steel companies around the world are competing to be better innovators and get an economy in all parts of the process, which include producing and storing very large amounts of hydrogen, but also ensuring green energy and having an efficient steelmaking process. Now, the cost for the green steel is high, but Sweden has a viable business case, I should say. The cost for green steel is 25% higher than for regular steel. So how do you get economy in that? We look at the cost for a car made from green steel. It will only increase the cost for the actual car by only 0.5%, because the whole car is not made of steel. There's a lot of knowledge and other products in it. And less than 0.5%, that's less than what you pay for leather seats or a set of tires on a new car. This is the business model, and it's the same for cement, by the way. It's the business model for fossil-free products today. There are premium products, but the cost of the final product is not prohibitive. Looking at fossil-free cement, it's as much as 75% higher than regular cement. But in a house, it's also less than 0.5%. So there's a business case for fossil-free products, and this is the way to go for any economy. Steel is a forerunner for this development in Sweden. I mention it as an example. The model from the steel industry is coming together in their vertical and developing roadmaps and including public actors and civil society. And it has become a template for a bigger undertaking under the heading Fossil-Free Sweden. The Fossil-Free Sweden is a forum for meeting between industry and government in a true public-private partnership where companies detail what they need from the government to be able to make the carbon transition. So there are enablers that the companies are asking the government for, and they include things like long-term policies, access to fossil-free energy, efficient permit procedures, and so on. I won't mention all of them to save some time. Issues like these are communicated from companies to agencies and the central government. Industries have come together to formulate 22 roadmaps in Sweden for industry verticals such as aviation, grocery stores, and steel, as I mentioned before. These roadmaps cover 70% of the territorial emissions in Sweden. They all have their own target years for becoming fossil-free and still set 2045 as their target year, but they are moving so swiftly and successfully that they are moving the goal up to 2035. Sweden is also promoting a similar approach with roadmaps for low-carbon transition to the international community with the initiative called Lead It together with India. And several countries participating. The Leadership Group for Industry Transition. And the Lead It enables collaboration and dialogue and maintain a tracker of some aspects of industry transition. And the tracker you see here is the tracker for steel. Korean manufacturer POSCO is mentioned there as well. We're also proud to be one of the world's largest providers of climate finance. We are at the forefront of encouraging the multilateral development banks to phase out support to fossil fuels. We're the 6th largest donor to both the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environment Facility. And Sweden makes sure that assistance is given to those needing it the most, being the only country to have entered into a multi-annual financing agreement with the Adaptation Fund and the Least Developed Countries Fund. Adaptation finance accounts for almost 50% of our bilateral climate finance. Sweden recently decided to increase this with 13% in 2022 and to double it by 2025. Sweden is also collaborating internationally in Article 6 projects of the Paris Agreement. And one way of doing this is to invest in green development projects in other countries, such as building a biogas production facility in Argentina and to transfer the mitigation outcomes. The Swedish Energy Agency is working together with the Global Green Growth Institute, that we'll hear more from later, with headquarters here in South Korea. They have around 30 member countries joined together for a tailor-made program. The GGGI has facilitated MOUs between Sweden and several countries to cooperate on the implementation of Article 6. Very useful. The Swedish Energy Agency made a call for proposal for projects and received proposals from 60 countries. They developed 9 virtual pilots as examples and eventually landed in 6 international collaboration projects. Biogas in Argentina and the Dominican Republic, landfill gas collection in Colombia, efficient household stoves in Ethiopia, solar photovoltaics in Ghana, and green hydrogen in South Africa. To my knowledge, it's only Sweden and Switzerland that have systematically used this opportunity so far. The GGGI is important in this work as it has developed a blueprint for what the institutional infrastructure can look like in countries engaging in Article 6 collaborations. These are modest examples of projects, but interesting to look at. They are not considered part of the Swedish aid, but are viable projects in their own right, in the Swedish national ambition to reach climate targets. This is my last slide. And in closing, there is urgency and opportunity, and I told you about how Sweden is acting on this. First, with open innovation for fossil-free competitiveness, which requires state-of-the-art science and technology and leads to further advancing the knowledge content of products and services. Second, with engaging with counterparts in industry verticals and PPP, where you mutually respect legitimate concerns. And third, with international collaboration to share good practice and realize opportunities for mutual benefit. Thank you very much for your attention. Kamsahamnida.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hector. This morning we heard that Mr. Acemoglu said that democratization and growth can go together. And as Sweden shows, Mr. Hector just showed that actually green growth, in the sense that growth and going green can come together. And the global goal for fossil-free was 2050, but Swedish goal is even 5 years earlier, 2045, and that's very impressive. And now the second presentation is from Dr. Kim Jong-wook. He's the Executive Director for CID, that's the KSP Institute within the KDI. So Dr. Kim, please.
네, 반갑습니다. 통역.
Hello, I understand we have interpretation. so I'm going to test her capability to interpret my presentation. So KSP, as you understand, it's all about knowledge sharing and also to provide assistance for international cooperation. And this is an initiative that is led by the Korea Development Institute, supported by the Ministry of Economy and Finance, working collaboratively with various organizations and developing partner countries to set the national agenda and also to make a contribution to international cooperation, as you may be very well aware. Of course, the need for knowledge sharing is becoming greater than ever before, but there are various crises that are confronting us. The inflation and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is leading to disruptions in the global supply chain that is continuing to suppress us. And traditionally speaking, productivity is decreasing, and the climate crisis is affecting our lives at the same time. And it is very important that we share our knowledge and also to seek solutions collectively. So KSP needs to be bolstered even further. In Korea, we've had the launch of a new administration that is now trying out various new policies. I'm going to skip some of the details over here, but I will focus on KSP and also the ODA, Official Development Assistance. There's a focus on ODA packaging, strategic ODA, and to also streamline various bureaucratic process to improve the efficiency of such cooperation. And Darren in the morning talked about the importance of institution, and we're fully aware of that as well. That is why KSP, in many ways, is dealing with the institutional building in the central government as well as local governments, and also to improve capacity building. And loan and capacity building support are also linked to KSP as a result. And we see such trends growing. Traditional industries or trade, of course, these were the areas where most demand was created for KSP. But as you can see from the red circle over here, we get a lot of requests for projects in the environment area sector, especially our partner countries. They want to receive support and they want to work together with us in the environmental sector. And of course, sustainability is a very important issue. In Pakistan or Sri Lanka or many Central American countries, they're undergoing sovereign debt issues and financial issues, and also for fiscal resilience is becoming an important theme for KSP. And this is to make national finance more sustainable, and we're trying to provide as much help as necessary. And as for SMEs, productivity for the SMEs or certification and providing the right support for SME, that is something that we're mulling over as well. Of course, large companies may have a competitiveness in terms of their effectiveness and efficiency, but in order for our economy to become sustainable and resilient, it is very important that our SMEs become sustainable at the same time. And I believe that our policies are going to be very helpful to other countries in that regards. And that is also some elements that we're dealing with in terms of KSP implementation. Now let's take a look at some of the new demands for the sectors. For example, climate change and innovation in science and technology and ICT. They want Korea to transfer our experience and know-how in relation to that, and also for public management and administration. And they also, many partner countries are interested in having discussion in public management and also to come up with the right solutions for the sector. If you look at our global challenges and also the uncertainties around the world, international cooperation and the related programs and projects are becoming important more than ever. That is why we continue to work with international organizations as well as partner countries in carrying out these international cooperation projects. And I just want to underscore the following fact. Not only the public sector, but we need to have the private sector participation. We need to have their engagement so that we can address various challenges that confront us. This conference brings together international organizations, partner countries, and also the private sector. We hope to see deeper engagement going forward so that we can move towards stronger international cooperation going forward. That concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for Dr. Kim for his nice presentation of KSP activities. I particularly took note that he emphasized the cooperation with the private sector as well. And he also talked about this ODA packaging in the sense that before, the KSP has been very excellent in terms of the giving policy prescriptions, but often it's not followed by actual finance and loans and capacity building. But now it's moving toward more comprehensive packaging. So not only is touched about policy prescription, but actually come up with financing, loans and grant, and human resource development so that we can build a very effective institutions. And let's switch gears and we hear from the partner country. The next presentation will be Ambassador Nemanja Grubic from Serbia. Please.
Annyeonghaseyo, everyone. My name is Nemanja Grubic. I'm the ambassador of Serbia to Korea. I'm very honored and pleased to be here today and to talk about these very important issues. And I really feel that the KDI the conference today is very probably the best place to talk about the modern and contemporary challenges that today's world is facing with, as we heard from some of the speakers that talked before me. As one of the wise men before said, without knowledge, action is useless, and knowledge without action is futile. So we really need to build upon the knowledge we have so far, and also we have to share the knowledge between us in order to progress in the future. Because we don't have much time today, I decided to share my presentation today in three parts. The first part being the process of digitalization in Serbia and some of the priorities that we have set as the government. The second part would be some of the positive practices and some of the positive examples of cooperation in the field of digitalization with the Republic of Korea. And the third part would be some of the ideas and proposals for cooperation in the future in regards to this. When I was preparing for my post here in Korea, I've noticed that definitely digitalization is one of the sectors and one of the fields in which cooperation between Serbia and Korea is the strongest one. And that is because Serbia has decided, let's say since 10 or 15 years ago, that digitalization of the e-government is definitely one of the top priorities, and that's definitely one of the only ways to move forward in the future in order to provide as best possible services to the citizens as possible. In this sense, I would like to mention that Serbia has established its first institution dealing with the e-government back 10 or 12 years ago, and we have adopted a lot of legal frameworks and legal acts in this regard since then. Also, building up on that, I want to say that these kind of priorities are set also within the Constitution and different legal frameworks. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to figure it. Also, Serbia has decided to adopt digitalization and the fourth industrial revolution, provided as a unique opportunity for our country to move forward. We have so far established 4 science and technology parks in our country, in Belgrade, Novi Sad, in cities of Niš and Čačak. And also one very important sector that we decided to digitize is our health sector, and the health sector so far has already been digital. I'm sorry. Having some technical issues here. Okay. 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 One other very important thing that I want to mention when it comes to digitalization in Serbia is the data center in the third biggest city in Serbia, that is the city of Kragujevac. This data center is, when it comes to information structure and the security, one of the most advanced in the Southeast Europe. It not only hosts the data system for the government sector, but also provides services to the commercial sector as well. So we are really proud of it. Also, what I want to mention, and it was, I think, present in one of the previous slides, is that Serbia is one of the first countries within the Southeast Europe to adopt the AI, artificial intelligence strategies, and now is working on implementing these strategies. Now moving to the KSP story of Serbia. Serbia has so far implemented and realized 4 very successful, I would say, KSP projects with Korea. The first one was the one in 2018 and 2019. 2018-2019, that's the one, the one concerning the effective cloud-based data system in Serbia. KDI has helped us realize that different Serbian ministries have different data systems, but also local governments have different data systems. So in order to unify this, we needed to unify this. And KDI, along with the partnering institutions and companies, of course, helped us with this. The second one was realized in 2019, 2020, the one which was about the e-government system and the building effective framework with this. The third one being in 2020, 2021, strengthening capacity, the tax policy. Of course, the only 2 certain things in the world are debt and tax. So we needed our tax service and tax authority in Serbia to be more effective, to be cost effective, and KDI, along with this KSP project, helped us achieve this. In 2021, 2022, we had our first project dealing with cloud-based cities. Smart cities, and smart cities are definitely the concept of the future. In some countries, of course, they are a matter of the present, but we are willing to do more when it comes to this in the future as well. We have 2 other very successful stories when it comes to ICT cooperation in Serbia, and that is the so-called EGCC, that is the E-Government Cooperation Center, which belongs to the Serbian government, actually is a part of the Serbian IT government office, and the second one being the SKIP Center. I'm trying to find, this is the SKIP Center. SKIP Center is actually being built, actually being organized by the MOU, the cooperation between the Serbian government and National Information Agency of Korea, based on the MOU that was signed back in 2017. And this one is basically aimed at bridging the, let's say, digital divide that still exists in Serbia, because some older, of course, older generations of people are still struggling with using the ICTs, and this center is basically aimed for them. So far, about 60,000 people have had different free courses and seminars, workshops there, and we consider this project to be also very, very successful. Now, because my time is slowly running up, I just wanted to mention a few ideas and a few directions in which we as Serbia, but also me personally, think the KSP can go in the future. And I think that's dealing with some of the contemporary challenges that the world is facing today. The first one, of course, we saw with the COVID-19 that the health problem and the spread of the virus in the global dimensions can be a very, very big challenge. In that sense, the e-governments and some of the portals, web portals that we had in Serbia had proven to be very, very efficient. back in 2021, a lot of people applied for the vaccination, and the whole vaccination process application went through the web portal, which was a very good thing, and the KSP also had its role to play when it comes to this. The second thing that I wanted to mention is definitely climate change. I think the climate change unnecessarily leads to also the problem of energy efficiency. We will need to use more energy definitely in the future. Right now we are seeing a lot of problems with the energy supplying problems and issues. So we will need to learn how to use energy more efficiently, and I think sharing experiences also through the KSP programs could help us dealing with this. And one other, and probably the last part that I wanted to mention is the bioscience and biotechnology. Serbia is currently building its first bioscience R&D center. We are planning for it to be operational by 2025. And we are hoping for the KDI and, of course, Korea as a partner country to also take part in this, as we feel that we need to bring closer the life sciences on one side and the ICTs on the other side. Once again, I want to thank the organizers for having me here today, as I believe that this is the proof of very good cooperation between Serbia and Korea, not only with the KSP program, but also in different other fields of cooperation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador. He introduced 4 KSP projects in Serbia, based all on the digitalization. As the Vice Minister Bang mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, Korea has a comparative advantage in digitalization. And we are glad to hear that all 4 projects was very successful, and I hope that all the KSP providers pay particular attention to the potential future project. He talked about energy efficiency, health, and bioscience. I hope that all these 3 agencies pay particular attention to Ambassador's request. And next, we'll hear from Dr. Park Choro, Director General for Development Cooperation Office in KOTRA.
네, 여러분 안녕하세요. 저 코트라에서 개발 협력 업무를 담당하고 있는 박철호 실장.
I am in charge of development cooperation at KOTRA. My name is Cholho Park. Now, first of all, it is a great honor for me to be attending this discussion today. Now, as for the topic given today, about expanding private participation to promote green cooperation under the crisis of uncertainties. So I would like to discuss this topic and also about the projects that KOTRA is supporting to this end. Now, as was mentioned in the presentation several times already, we are currently faced with a number of crises.
네, COVID-19.
Of course, there is the COVID-19 pandemic, which has brought an unprecedented fear to humanity. There is also the food and security crisis, as well as extreme weather conditions arising from climate change. So we see that because of this composite crisis, green cooperation is no longer an option, it is a must. In order to respond to these crises, what we need is transnational cooperation. And it is also important for the donor countries and the partner countries to put up a joint response for the outcome to be mutually beneficial. Now, of course, as Professor Asmoglu has mentioned earlier, in the inclusive institution concept, private participation is very important. So it is important for the businesses to take proactive part in major issues of partner countries like the environmental issues so that we can increase and maximize mutual benefits to all. Now, since the adoption of the Glasgow Climate Pact, we see that there has been global acceleration of the transition to the new climate regime. And also, to achieve the SDGs, in addition to the existing ODA, we need additional $2 trillion of funding. And that is why the international community is also encouraging private engagement. Now, being in step with such call of the time, what we need is to have a Green New Deal consultation body that consists of the industry, academia, and research. Now, the 4 key areas of the Green New Deal, which are industrial infrastructure, smart city, green energy, and healthcare. So if we can discover green projects for businesses to participate in these 4 fields, and if we can also remove the constraints, for example, regulations and institutions against these projects, then that would go a long way. And we also, so along with the Green New Deal consultative body, we also need to strengthen our support for ESG management by businesses. We can support the acquisition of international environmental certifications by the businesses that are working to reduce the energy and resource consumption, as well as to minimize carbon emission, as well as pollutants. And the KSP can also serve as the platform to broaden green cooperation projects. One example would be the cooperation with Laos. So based on the MOU with Laos, we will implement the KSP project to establish a master plan on carbon credit transactions and reinforce human resource capabilities. And we believe that this can leave a best practice example of leading the carbon zero era in Laos and to broaden the economic cooperation between the 2 countries as well as the businesses of the 2 countries as well. And we will continue to provide proactive support for the businesses through the launch of the private project proposal system, where the businesses are able to propose their own projects. Now, because of the time constraint, let me just move into the conclusion. KOTRA recently launched the Green Growth Support Office, and we will provide support for matching between global companies and leading green companies and with Korean companies. And we are also providing Green Initiative Project, and this is to provide our businesses with support in terms of providing and donating low-carbon green products to partner countries, and also green technology transfer. Now, in conclusion, I do believe that the ultimate goal of development cooperation is to achieve sustainable win-win cooperation. And to achieve this goal, green cooperation can be a specific action strategy. And in this development cooperation project, private participation is more important than ever before. Thank you very much for your attention.
Presentation by Serbia is more focused on the digital cooperation. And now Dr. Bak's presentation, as you can see, is more focused on the green. And I particularly liked, he mentioned that going green is not a choice, but a must. And he also introduced the KOTRA's activity to open up this for the private sector participation. I think we can revisit this issue later for private sector participation. Next panelist is the Paraguay Ministry of Industry and Trade, Mr. Aníbal Jiménez Clark, please.
안녕하세요. I'm from Paraguay, probably the farthest country from Korea, 36-hour flight, but I'm sure we are probably one of the closest friends in Mercosur and South America. This year we celebrate 60 years of friendship from Korea. In 1962, we received the first group of immigrants from Korea, so Paraguay grew up with Korean friends. So I'd like to thank this invitation and share briefly our experience with KSP programs. This is probably the 4th project we've been implemented with KSP program. We have had collaboration in the industrial parks area, the food industry, health industry, and more recently in the automobile sector, which I'd like to share. Briefly, some information. We became a member of Mercosur in 1991. We were then the weakest economy. We are a landlocked country, which, as you know, provides or restricts a lot of access to logistics and also increases cost of production. We had no automobile industry back then, and we are like a sandwich country between Brazil and Argentina, which had very strong automobile industry. So we had to quickly present some sort of policy to attract foreign investment or domestic investment in this field. We immediately started drafting some ideas. In 1998, we produced the first automobile industry incentive law, which basically focused on incentives and low cost of production. And after a little while, we received 7 companies, local investment, which produced motorcycles, bicycles in the beginning, and they started employing around 10,000 from 1998. Afterward, in 2013, we started receiving foreign investment, companies from Korea, Japan, Germany, basically looking to the global market, to the regional market as a supplier for Brazilian and Argentinian companies. And we, up to date, have 5 global companies producing wiring, harness, and employ over 15,000 workers. This produced in government what I called a two-opposed model policy. This is the reason why we asked KSP program to assist the government in review its industrial policy on the automobile sector, and we were very thankful to having 2 great partners, KOTRA and the Hyundai Research Institute, which is the best think tank in Korea, and which provides good advice on economic development. Basically, we had, as I summarized, 2 models. As most of you know, the import substitution model, which was the domestic investment, which required a lot of protection, high tariff from competition, low technology, no export, no local suppliers, weak government role, no technology or very high dependent technology on only one supplier, and no compliance on technology standards. And on the other hand, we had the other country which produced export-oriented companies with high quality standards. They inserted their production in the global value-added chain. They had technology transfer programs, and we had their diversification from investment from Korea, Germany, and Japan, as I said. So this situation made government think what were the future for which model we wanted to implement. Based on the Hyundai Research Institute recommendations, we are looking into a long-term master plan, which recommends Paraguay working on building an ecosystem, making more strong government institutions, recommend on 4 pillars, working on the R&D, which I was amazed that Korea invests $25 billion in R&D per year. When I explained that Paraguay spends 8 or 11 millions per year in R&D to my HRI colleagues, they thought it was per month, but they were amazed how little we invest in R&D. We have also a recommendation to build infrastructure to attract foreign investment and create a automobile cluster park, work on improving our policies, and work on enhancing our human resources capability. Looking into the climate change condition, Paraguay is a green energy producer. We are probably the #1 country for the hydroelectric production energy. I was looking at the first presentation, and we would like to become closer to producing no carbon products or free carbon products in the future. For the EV industry, which is the future, Hyundai Research Institute recommended that the government should show the way, lead the way, through public procurement, through infrastructure, through chargers, and set a goal with a private sector toward driven results policies. I thank you very much once again. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Actually, he said it took 36 hours from Paraguay to here, but it's a very close country. And I personally also had the experience of spending 36 hours to visit Asuncion, and I must say that it's very worthwhile. And for some of you who might not be familiar with that, but actually 1962 is the year that many Korean people immigrated to South America, and Paraguay opened up their borders very gladly, and many Korean immigrants started at the Paraguay. So not only Paraguay grew with Korean friends, but Korea itself has also grown with Paraguay friends. And I find it particularly interesting about this import substitution and export-oriented strategy, because before 1962, Korea also pursued import substitution strategy. And then 1962, it changed to outward-looking or export-oriented strategy. And that's when the Korean economy began to turbocharge it and begin to grow its spectacular growth. And so the strategy they are taking is very important. And Korea, and as well as Paraguay case, showed that exposing your country to international competition is one of the best way to keep growing. So now next from Mr. Jo In-gyu from the EXIM, Director General, MDB Operation Department.
안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. 한국수출입은행 다자사업.
Hello, everyone. This is Jo In-gyu, Director General of the MDB Operation Department of the Export-Import Bank of Korea. Now, I would like to talk about the strategy of KSP program from KEXIM and also the follow-up projects. Now, when we discuss various KSP projects, now what we cite as success is when the recommendations for our consultations have been reflected into the project, or when the KSP project has resulted in specific deliverables. So in the case of KEXIM, we also, if we compare with KOTRA and KDI, then in terms of the organization, what makes us different is that KEXIM is a financial institution. So for KEXIM, we handle the EDCF project commissioned by the Korean government, and we have been handling this business for 30 years. And then also we also provide export credit as well as export and import credit to the businesses of Korea that also trade with overseas countries. So the partner countries participating in the KSP program, when it involves KEXIM, then we can also provide not only the sharing of the knowledge, but also the financing aspect. And the KSP strategy for KEXIM is to make sure that our financing can also be provided in the end. So most of the partner countries of KSP are also EDCF countries as well. So from the beginning of the KSP project, we closely consult with the EDCF related departments. And from the candidate selection to the consultation, we also make sure that there is close consultation with the ministries and the organizations of the partner country as well. And also together with the MDBs like the World Bank or the IDB and ADB, EBRD, we also provide joint consulting for KSP projects. So if we have the joint project with MDB, then for the MDBs together with KEXIM, we can come up with the basic planning. So these have been the KEXIM's strategy for the past few years, and they have also led to the actual realization and implementation of a number of projects. I would like to now show you some examples. One is the medical complex in Uzbekistan. Now, this was over $420 million of financing, and the total budget was over $500 million. So this was one of the largest healthcare project ever. And the Uzbekistan government came up with the proposal to Korea, and rather than providing support for individual hospitals or institutions, they asked for support for a more comprehensive medical complex. This will include a number of hospitals as well as medical colleges and also the healthcare staff as well. So this was a large-scale project that EDCF alone could not provide all the support. So the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Economy and Finance, as well as the Ministry of Education of Korea also took part, and also KOTRA and KOFI, as well as loan and grant organizations also took part in this project. So again, this was a large-scale project that required a lot of players. Now, in order to fulfill these requests from Uzbekistan, now this was proposed as an urgent project, urgent KSP project to the MOEF, and requested the mid to long-term roadmap to be drafted. And then in 2019, there was the short, mid, and long-term roadmap on the development of a national medical complex center that was established, including financing support. And as a result of this, starting in 2019, the Uzbekistan National Medical Complex went into construction. Children's Hospital has been completed. General Hospital and the National Oncology Center and Medical College are currently underway. So in this case, there was a comprehensive roadmap to be made, and this also included participation by KOICA and KEXIM. So this was a large-scale comprehensive project, and this is a leading KSP project where the proposal went all the way to the implementation. And next case is the KSP and MDB co-financing project, and this took place in Guatemala. So this came about in 2020, and through the annual meeting between KEXIM and IDB, this was selected as a joint consulting project. And there was approval for $70 million, and the project is currently underway to develop digital connectivity infrastructure. So KEXIM is involved in 14 KSP projects, so digital ICT and green innovation, as well as in other innovation projects as well. Now for the digital ICT, green innovation, and infrastructure projects, now these are also some of the key cooperation areas of EDCF as well. Now, among the KSP projects that KEXIM is involved with, there are some projects, for example, the El Salvador project. So total 4 projects have been now moved on to the main phase of the project. Then also the EIPP, and also the Uzbekistan, the Angre City Water Modernization Project. So these 2 projects have also been expanded to the EDCF main project. So KEXIM working together with MDB and also running EDCF and providing export credit. So utilizing various financing tools, we provide the support and make efforts to lead to the successful conclusion of the KSP projects. So down the road, from the beginning of the KSP projects, we will have close consultation with the relevant organizations and ministries of respective countries so that more KSP projects can move on to the main phase and come to a successful conclusion. Thank you very much.
Third, basically, they are the banks that has money. So when we have published prescriptions, many of the good projects are actually financed by KEXIM and not only by KXM standalone, but sometimes in cooperation with MDB or other international agency or other domestic agencies, so that we can all work together, pooling our resources together, so that policy prescription can be actually realized by actual financing, and that's the trend. And you can see most of the projects are either on going green or going digital. So that's the policy direction of the KSP. Now, next panelist, and last but not the least, is Mr. Shulka from GGGI.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair and fellow panelists, for giving the opportunity. Thank you to the speakers before me who mentioned climate change. Kind of makes my job easy to throw in a few complex terms related to the topic. And thank you, Mr. Anders Hectors from Embassy of Sweden, for mentioning GGGI in your presentation and our joint work with your Swedish Energy Agency. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending this conference. My name is Sachin Shukla. I'm Senior Advisor at Global Green Growth Institute, GGGI. I'm an Indian national, and I'll be making my presentation in English language. I'll be introducing a few on carbon credits, but if it somewhere gets too complex, just three terminologies that I hope you can take away from this presentation. One is ITMO, second is NDC, which is Nationally Determined Contributions, and the third is Article 6. I think that will be enough learning for anybody who is not deep diving into climate change at this point of time. Yes. A quick introduction. My organization, GGGI, is a treaty-based international organization that supports developing economies to achieve sustainable and inclusive growth. Go back. How do I go back? Thank you. GGGI is headquartered in Seoul. We are proud to have origins in Korea, where we were first a domestic organization, and then we became an international organization and expanded to 43 member countries. As a trusted neutral advisor, we work with member and partner governments on climate action and green growth related investment opportunities. We work on upstream work, example analysis at the economy, policy and regulatory level, and also downstream work which involves project-specific design, financing and implementation of projects. We deliver this at subnational, national and regional level projects to deliver outcomes. Before I go into this slide, let me just say that the concept of carbon credits or carbon pricing is not new. All nations have energy needs. In response, they have developed energy producing and consuming infrastructure built on 25, 30, 40-year economic models and financial calculations. And this infrastructure is costly and cannot be changed overnight. To manage this dilemma, carbon market mechanisms have been introduced, which allows nations to use each other's comparative advantage for a limited period and still lower collective global warming emissions. In other words, you can use your own 10-year-old coal-fired power stations with 20 years of productive life left if you financially help someone else make their next energy source be a solar park or any other renewable energy source. This carbon market mechanisms, this mechanism basically allows you to maximize the reduction in global emissions while reducing the costs and keeping them at the lowest levels. This cost focus is kind of important because many countries are trying to also achieve their sustainable development goals, and they also require enormous amounts of funds. And for developing countries and least developing countries, as you can imagine, this is quite a bit of challenge. As I said 2 slides ago, the concept of carbon credits or carbon pricing is not entirely new. So what is new? The new part comes with the NDCs, which is the nationally determined contribution. So before after Kyoto Protocol, emission reductions were traded in the name of CERs, certified emission reductions. After Paris Agreement, similar certificates will be traded in the name of ITMOs, which are internationally transferred mitigation outcomes. But NDCs is the key difference to be noted here. And NDCs are basically the baseline that all countries voluntarily need to comply with before they can come to the market and sell their carbon credits. To reemphasize, after Kyoto Protocol, only Annex 1 countries were given the targets to achieve their GHG reduction targets, and non-Annex 1 countries had no targets. So basically any project they did, if they can come up with an angle that they were reducing global carbon emissions, they can basically come to the market and make some money out of it. After Paris Agreement, they have to meet a certain baseline of their nationally determined contributions, and then whatever is the surplus come up in the market and sell them to other countries which are not able to meet their nationally determined contributions. And this is a big, big change going forward. Now, this NDCs is where the Article 6 comes into the picture in a big way. And within Article 6, there are various modalities in which provisions are being made to incentivize various players in various stages to meet their global emission reduction contributions. So in 6.2, Article 6.2, the provision is to bilaterally basically trade between 2 countries and trade carbon reduction, emission reduction certificates. Article 6.4 provides for multilateral mechanism, which was earlier called CDM, Clean Development Mechanism. This can be done either under COPS or UNFCCC. There is also Article 6.8, which does not talk about actually trading of the certificates, but it talks about financial incentives, technology transfers, and other capacity building initiatives. It's a non-trading kind of an initiative which is being provided. Obviously, we are in the early stages of this new markets that we are trying to develop after the Paris Agreement. So in the early stages, we are just trying to achieve a bilateral transaction. So there is more focus on Article 6.2. However, as things evolve, Article 6.4 and 6.8 will also gain momentum and will gain transaction. So as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of parallels which can be drawn between Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement. NDCs are the major difference. In Kyoto Protocol, what was emission reductions is now called mitigation outcomes. What was CERs earlier is now ITMOs. What was Clean Development Mechanism or CDM will come under a new name in Article 6.4. What is Emission Reduction Purchase Agreement will now be called MOPA or Mitigation Outcome Purchase Agreement. Obviously, the transaction, when we mention transaction, it looks sometimes very simple, but when we are talking about development of an entire market, there are a lot of things to be done so that standardizations, quality control, and governance frameworks are in place so that reductions that we achieve are actually credible in nature and the dollar flow, billions of dollars which flow through these mechanisms from one country to another or from one geography to another, have actually achieved something in the name of global warming targets that we have in place. So there is a huge complex mechanism which is in place, many institutions are working towards to get this in place. It involves governments, project proponents, and auditors. This is one of the outline that is in place. There could be multiple versions of it which can be seen, but broadly they cover the same area. Just a quick plug-in in terms of what we are trying to do in GGGI. In GGI, I'm proud to say that we have already gained early head start into readiness of projects, policy and project development, governance framework, capacity building, and knowledge sharing. We are working on all of these. We have partnered with at least 10 countries who are interested in working with us in development of these new carbon markets. Obviously, these are early days, but we have still made headwinds. As I was talking to one of the panel members, there are few countries who are willing to stick their neck out and say that, okay, we are done with we have a plan for our NDCs and we are thinking about the carbon markets, because bulk of the countries, I would say, 80-90% of the countries are still wrapping their head around how to deal with the NDCs and the targets that they have voluntarily taken for themselves. But we have few brave countries who are also parallelly thinking on these countries. We have actually been able to mobilize resources from, as mentioned, Swedish Energy Agency, Norwegian Ministry of Climate and Environment, and EKI to support the program on these 10 countries. I must say that all of these 10 countries are seller countries, and all the countries which are sponsoring the projects are actually buyer countries. I'm also informed that we are also working with various Korean government ministries and institutions, and I assume that in KSP in the future there will be a program where we can also partner on the carbon market developments. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Shukla. About, I think 12 years ago, Korean government has launched a very ambitious green growth program, and along the line, we are able to host two international organizations, GGGI and GEF in Korea. And Mr. Shukla just explained the difference between Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement. And he's talking about so-called ITMO project, where the country who try to achieve its NDC can share the outcome with the partner countries. And already at the beginning, Mr. Hector introduced 3 projects in terms of the climate financing that they are working with the GGGI. And he finally concluded that there will be more, or actually new ITMO project by KSP. So thank you very much to all the 7 panelists. Now we have some time to answer questions from the floor. If you have any questions, please. If not, we have collected 2 questions actually before the session. And one is that how Korea's knowledge sharing is different from other advanced countries program, and happened to be directed at me, so let me answer that. Basically, other countries' development experience is also important, and some countries has been very, very generous and committed to the ODA. But perhaps the difference we can talk about Korea, or its competitive advantage in this area, is that, number one, Korea is the only country that moved from so-called donor country, from recipient country to donor country after the Second World War. So its experience is very recent and relevant, and successful. In that way, Korea very much emphasized not just the fund, but rather the experiences, because we have our share of failures, but overall it's very successful, just like the outward-looking or export-oriented strategy mentioned by Paraguay. So we would like to share all those things with other countries, and that part, the knowledge part, is perhaps more valuable than its funding part. Another question I got from the floor is that, I guess this is to Mr. Kim from KDI, but how do you identify the KSP need for partner country? That was the question directed for Mr. Kim.
Yeah, we got the request from the countries. Basically, our partner countries make a proposal to the Ministry of Finance, and then the Ministry of Finance select the candidates and then assigns the implementing agencies, including KDI and Exim Bank. So basically, we are not just providing knowledge to the partner countries. Rather, we are sharing those knowledges. That means we identify what is needed in the partner countries, and then we try to gather the expertise in Korea and the partner countries as well, so that we can harmonize, cooperate to work out the best alternative for the demanding the problems such as climate changes or even infrastructure and technology changes. So it's up to our partner countries to stress out what they are needing for the sharing the programs, and then we can mobilize our resources and other expertise over the globe to find out the solutions for that. So that's what we are.
Basically, as Dr. Kim mentioned, we believe in demand-driven approach, so that we ask partner countries to come up with ideas and then we review them. But I also would like to emphasize that, as Dr. Park mentioned during his presentation, now we open up basically for the private sector to come up with the private sector proposals, and that we also is a very important source of identifying a potential project. Let me actually ask a question to Mr. Hector. You have a very ambitious goal of achieving the fossil-free country by 2045. But now we all know, because of the war in Ukraine, Europe has a big problem now. They are talking about restarting the coal power plants. How do you see all this geopolitical situation can affect your goal, and not only your country, but European and overall global goal of achieving the fossil fuel by 2050?
Yeah, let's hope it will be passing over quickly, so that it will only be a speed bump on the road to fossil-free. But definitely, energy prices in Europe it's crazy right now. It's 4, 5, 6 times the level it has been. But that is also, it has both good and bad effects, of course. There's a lot of people buying firewood burning stoves to create, do through the winter and save some money. But it's also increasing the demand for photovoltaics. People in Sweden are putting on photovoltaics on the roof like crazy these days to be more self-sufficient. And other types of more sustainable energy sources. So there is both sweet and sour effects, I think, and I hope it will pass very quickly.
So despite the problems of this war in Ukraine, basically, Mr. Hector emphasized that it's sort of a double-edged sword, so that even though it will be painful for the short term, but it will accelerate the switch to the more renewable or more cleaner energy.
Maybe a little bit like COVID made a big, strong push for digital transition also. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Kim, please.
Yes, I have another question for that. So, it's nationwide agenda. However, you should build up the consensus before making declaration for the fossil-free economy. So, how did you build up those consensus?
How did we build up what?
Consensus. Consensus.
Oh, the consensus. That's a really good question. I think industry, when the governments came home from Paris 2015 and they said, we are going to be fossil-free by 2050, and the companies said, what? We didn't ask for this. That's us. We have to make these changes. But they also realized, of course, that this is something that they had to do. So the government said, what do you need in order to become fossil-free? How can we help you? How can we enable this transition? And the companies started thinking, and they realized that, well, if we can ask for relevant enablers from the government, we can actually have a competitive advantage. We can have fossil-free competitiveness. Sweden is a country with a small population, so we really have to be on edge with our companies to do that. So there is a long tradition of talking between the government and industry in Sweden. There is very little corruption, very little movement of people between, so there's a fairly honest, and we're a consensus-oriented people. We like to get along, we don't like conflict.
Well, it's a very enviable environment. Korea also has an NDC goal by cutting our emission by 40% compared to 2018 until 2030, which is just 8 years away. It's very painful. But as you emphasized and some other presenters made, basically this transition to green is not only inevitable, but also it's an open opportunity, as the green steel case shows. Still, I think it's very, very ambitious for Korea. And I guess ITMO by GGGI can provide some relief in that regard. And I just wonder, there are 3 KSP agencies, KDI, KOTRA, the KXIM, but so far we don't have any ITMO project up to now. I don't know whether do you have any plan to move more aggressively in that regard, because to achieve the Korean NDC, around 10.5% of reduction should come from overseas. And perhaps KSP can play a leading role in that regard.
Yeah, that's a challenging question. Anyhow, the KSP is one type of the official development aid, and we have a specific law which stipulates the implementation of those projects. And ITMO is somewhat a little beyond the scope of the ODA so far. So basically, legal framework should be modified to include those the ITMO projects or even other carbon pricing projects, so that we can achieve the goal in 2030. So we are working on that. However, so far we do not have those projects on the pipeline, but it's developing, and we try to stress out those efforts in rising demand on the carbon or climate change issues.
Well, that's a very encouraging answer. My understanding is that Sweden already showed 3 ITMO projects, Swiss has 5, and Japan has 17, and Korea still has to come up with the first project. And I hope that, scoping problem, of course, but KSP and GGGI can work together so that we can have a very meaningful CO2 reduction project under the ITMO in the coming years. So, because of the time limit, if there's no burning question, can I just conclude that? I think we have a very interesting session, and basically COVID-19 accelerates existing trend of digitalization as well as green transformation. And Mr. Asemoglu at the beginning emphasized that all these efforts should be inclusive and sustainable. And digital green also provides new growth opportunities. And the role of international cooperation is increasingly important. GGGI and all the other institutions, or the MDBs. And private sector can play an increasingly important role, not only as just a source of fund, but also a source of new technology like green steel, and rigorous market test, and proposal for new project ideas. But also public sector should play enabling environment. And as Mr. Asemoglu emphasized, basically the formula for success is the private sector and public sector should work together with a good balancing. And for the KSP itself, KSP should move toward not only just policy prescription, but as a comprehensive package with the financing, with capacity development. And I hope that in the future we can see more, not more, but the beginning of the ITMO project that it can contribute not only the reduction of the partner countries, but also Korea and this goal. So that, let me sum up today's lesson is go green, go digital, go inclusive, and go with the private sector. So with that, let me close the session, and thank you for all the panelists. So let me close the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you all panelists and the chair for your insightful discussion and excellent moderation. It was indeed a great opportunity to learn about a wide array of approaches taken by nations and organizations, and also hear about the perspectives from the leaders of knowledge sharing programs. So this brings us to the conclusion of the plenary session, and we will continue with parallel sessions in 10 minutes. Parallel session 1, under the theme of knowledge sharing on future resilience towards sustainable development, will be held here in the Dynasty Hall 1 and Hall 2. You can enjoy also the parallel session number 2 on knowledge sharing for economic cooperation towards sustainable development in Dynasty Hall 3, which is located adjacent to us. And participants may choose one between parallel sessions 1 or 2, and both sessions will begin simultaneously at 11:50. And if you have registered for parallel session 2, please take your tablet with you as you move your location. And also, participants who are with us online can choose the parallel session by clicking the Select the Session button on the top of your screen. Once again, I would like to kindly ask all of you to stay with us for the duration of the sessions. Thank you.
지금부터 2022 KSP 성과 공유
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to begin the parallel session in this 2022 KSP Dissemination Conference. Now, there will be 3 presentations under the topic of the knowledge sharing on future resilience towards sustainable development, to be followed by 2 discussants. The chair of this session is Professor Sung-Jin Kang of Korea University. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Sung-Jin Kang from Korea University. I will be chairing this session. Yes, we have had a lot of discussions about the achievements and also the prospects for KSP, and I understand that it started in 2004. And now at that time, it was mostly about economic development. Today, there is also broader focus on social development as well as environment as well. So all of them together, we call them sustainable development. So I see that now it is broadening into various fields as well. So because of the limited time, I would like to speak as little as possible. We will first hear from the 3 presentations. So I understand that from 2020, 2021, 22, so we will be hearing about the projects from the participants or the project leads themselves. So first we will have Professor Yongbom Yoon from the KEPCO International Nuclear Graduate School. And he will be followed by Mr. Usok Chang, General Manager of Industrial Research Department of Hyundai Research Institute. And we have Senior Researcher Sang Yeon Han from the Korea Road Traffic Authority. And the three presenters will be followed by two discussants, Mr. Chang Sun Chang, Lead in Transport and Sustainable Mobility from GGGI, and Mr. Hyun Soo Yoon, Director of Ecosian. So now this is how we are going to do this. We will have about 15-minute presentation from each presenter, and then 5-minute discussion from each discussant, and then we will open the floor for questions. And now let me go to Professor Yongbom Yoon regarding the Czech Republic electric power system.
포인트요? 포인트는 예, 반갑습니다.
I'm pleased to meet you. I am Yoon Young-bom, professor working at the KEPCO International Nuclear Graduate School. Today I'll talk about the grid stability technology of Korea, how to transfer that to the Czech Republic. So we had a co-study on this theme. I will talk about the results of the project that we did with the Czech Republic. This is the table of the contents. We'll look at the current status of electricity industry in the Czech and also Korea, and I will mostly talk about technologies that are related to EPS. If you look at the power composition of the Czech Republic, they have 21 gigawatt for installed capacity. So they have about 22 gigawatt, 22 plants with 1 gigawatt of capacity. So half transmission and half belongs to the distribution sector. If you look at the power mix, SCP, this is a coal power generation. That's about half of the total energy mix. Nuclear is about 20%. New renewable, that's about 10%. The rest is represented by gas and other power generators. Others include about 10%. This is electricity generation by source. Starting from 2000 till 2020, the trend shows that generation capacity hasn't been growing. It's fluctuating between 80 to 90 terawatt per hour. And out of the total generation, coal power and nuclear power account for a large share. For example, in 2020, coal power, 33 terawatt per an hour, and nuclear, 30 terawatt per an hour, renewable, about 10 terawatt per an hour. That was a composition back in 2020. This is a transmission network of the country. T is the DE, that's Germany. PL is Poland, and you have Austria and Slovakia that are neighboring countries adjacent to the Czech Republic. Red line is 400 kV transmission lines, and 220 kV lines are shown in light green, light blue. So the backbone network consists of 400 kV lines, and 220 kV lines are serving as supplementary lines for transmission. And as for the electricity, mostly power plants are located in the north, and in the middle you don't have TX or DX networks. And towards the south of the country, there's a lot of load centers for consumption. As such, power is generated in the north of the country through 400 kV or 200 kV lines. The power flows into the south of the country for consumption. Excuse me. This is electric power exchange with neighboring countries. These are the actual results. The red shows For example, from Germany and Poland, import into the country, and blue shows export out of the country. For example, Slovakia or Austria are the countries that are importing electricity from the Czech. Now, export exceeds the amount of import. In that regards, the Czech Republic can be perceived and can be called an electricity exporting country. This slide shows how electricity is flowing through the Czech Republic. It shows a pattern, transit flows. You have wind power generation, power plants largely installed in Germany, and the power is of course consumed by the domestic market, and the excess of which is exported to countries such as Austria and Italy, and countries that are located in the southern part of the continent. The transmission capacity is not sufficient, especially towards the south, so it would go through Germany. The red arrow shows exactly that flow of transit. The power will flow from north to south. So the Czech usually imports electricity from Germany and sends it to Austria or Slovakia, located in the south. But with more renewable in the energy mix, this pattern is going to become more noticeable. And wind power, because it's uncertain, controlling it and predicting, forecasting it will become a challenging issue for Czech. So in that regards, Korea decided to do a co-study and co-research with the country. This is the EU energy policies in the electricity sector. Largely, CO2 emission reduction and renewable energy deployment, or increasing capacity for renewable and providing interconnectivity to the neighboring grid. So pulling and integrating the energy market across the European region. And Czech is a member of the EU. So they have to go, their policies would have to be aligned with the higher level European policies. By 2015, there are three main objectives of the energy policy. First is security of energy supplies. That energy supplies have to become stable, and the energy sector has to become more competitive. Energy prices have to stay at a comparable level to other countries in the region. And third element is sustainability in demand and supply of energy. Environmental, financial, and social aspects would have to be taken into consideration to ensure sustainability. So the policy is currently being implemented, and also from a strategic point of view, there are 5 priorities. First of all, achieving a balanced energy mix and improving energy efficiency and savings. And third is developing infrastructure, for example, transmission and distribution network, how to make it more efficient. Fourth is, and also R&D and manpower development, human resources development, and energy security and resilience. That's the fifth element. Resilience is about emergency situations, unforeseen events that occur, how to overcome and how to rebound. So these are the 5 strategic priorities of the energy policy that are being implemented to address energy issues. Next slide shows how in 2016 compared to this is the energy mix composition in 2016. Coal back in 2016 was 50%, but the 2040 target is 11 to 21%. And for nuclear energy, from 29% to increase to 46 to 58%. Natural gas from 8 to 5 to 15%. and for renewable secondary energy sources from 13% to 18 to 25%. So this is the goal of the energy policy for a different energy mix. As for Korea, this slide shows the supply and demand of Korea EPS. It is based on the 9th power development policy of the country. And of course, the 10th supply and demand policy will come out and it will have some adjustments to the figure. And based on the 9th plan, in 2034, total electricity consumption is predicted to be at 648 terawatt per an hour. And the maximum peak load, peak power, to be at 117.5 gigawatt per an hour. Compared to the Czech's level is about 20% of Korea's level, but of course with more deployment of renewable energies, we will have to still deal with some issues of demand and supply. This is the fuel mix 2020, 130 terawatt per an hour. By 2014, it will be 117 terawatt per an hour. If you look at the share of renewable energy, by 34, it will be 22%, which means that there will be diverse impact on the grid. IEA has come up with a classification criteria for new renewable energy deployment. As you can see in the table, there are phase 1, 2, 3. For example, when renewable energy generation is less than 3%, or 3 to 15%, and 15 to 25%, or over 25%. What are the actions that are expected of the government in relation to the demand and supply of energy? By 2024, we will be entering the phase 3. So this figure shows a reference as to what actions are expected. This is the overall hierarchical system for EPS. We have EMS on the left side. We have various control centers at the bottom. Now we have established a control center for new renewable energy in order to respond to demand in renewable energy production. This is by IEA, 4 phases based on VRE integration, variable renewable energy integration. To focus on phase 3, new renewable energy will have important implications to the overall energy mix. So stabilization system, grid stabilization system will have to be established. And Korea has a lot of grid stabilization technologies. And what are some of the potential areas for cooperation with the Czech Republic? Number 1, analysis technology, HVDC, high voltage direct current technology, and generator control system test and model parameter estimation, and power system monitoring, construction, and battery stabilization technologies, and predicting renewable energy output. These are the areas in which our 2 countries can work together for research. And microgrid, especially in terms of distribution and consumers, if that is installed at the end users level, for example, if there are problems that occur on the grid, we will have to come up with some response measures to deal with such unforeseen events. So I didn't have a lot of time to go over the presentation, so let me just go to the conclusion slides. The Czech Republic and Korea are different, that they're connected to the European market, and we have a single standalone grid system. So that's a big difference. But if we have more renewable energy in the energy mix, it will lead to problems in terms of the demand and supply. So that is going to be the common challenge for a country. So we would have to work collaboratively going forward. So I proposed 3 things over here. Whether it is new renewable energy or microgrid, we have to take into consideration the characteristics of the technologies to improve reliability and resilience. For distribution, resource, and small-scale diesel generators will be installed at end-user level, and that would have to be efficiently operated from a local perspective. That will be a food for thought going forward. And of course, we'll have more power on the grid, so we'll have to come up with a local approach to stabilizing the grid system. That would be an implication for Korea as well. And also over the long term, not only in the power grid sector, but also heat and hydrogen. What we want to do is to optimize these different energy sources so that, and for this, I think this is a theme that we can work together with the Czech Republic. So with that proposal, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you.
감사합니다.
Thank you very much. Korea and the Czech Republic grid system comparison analysis was presented. How Korea's diverse technology can help the Czech Republic. You've talked about 11 different technologies and ways for cooperation. Korea is in an isolated region, and Europe is very much interconnected with each other. So that is the major difference that sets apart Korea from the Czech Republic. How our technology can be transferred and can be shared with the Czech partner. So thank you.
And we will move on to the next presentation to be delivered by Mr. Woo-seok Jang, the General Manager of Industrial Research Department of the Hyundai Research Institute. And he will talk about proposals to strengthen the automotive industrial policy of Paraguay.
네, 안녕하십니까. 저는 현대경제
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am from the Hyundai Research Institute. I am the General Manager of Industrial Research Department, Woo-seok Jang. Now, the Hyundai Research Institute, with the Paraguay Minister of Trade and Commerce, has been supporting the master plan for automotive industry development. Now, the automotive industry is now in the budding stage in Paraguay. And now at this juncture, then for Korea's experience. So Korea has the automotive industry development experience of over the past 60 to 70 years. So based on that, there has been a research to study the way forward for automotive industry in Paraguay. Now, there have been quite a lot of brisk economic cooperation between the two countries, and there have also been as a sporadic cooperation in the field of automotive as well. So, for example, Technopark and also Institute of Technology Development. So we have had cooperation with the Paraguay government as well as industry in this field. So based on the performance and the achievements so far, now, and also through the research, we have incorporated all the sporadic cooperation into this master plan so that the Paraguay Ministry of Trade and Commerce can work on legal, regulatory improvement, human resource development, and so forth based on the master plan. So we have conducted this research to come up with the master plan for Paraguay automotive industry development. Now, through this research, what we have focused on is that is the current stage of the Paraguay automotive industry, which is now in the budding stage. But then again, in the past 70 years or so, the automobile industrial paradigm itself is completely changing from the past 70 years. In other words, if we are to wholly transplant the Korean automotive industry in Paraguay, would this be relevant to this day and age? So for not only the Korean automobile industry, not only the OEMs, but also the parts providers. So some of the companies Now, as the industry is moving more and more away from the ICE and into other forms of vehicles, then now for some of the parts providers as well, I mean, some of the companies might be gone in the near future. So again, there is a shift from ICE to other forms of vehicles. And we see that the carbon neutrality and reduction in GHG, now these are the important keywords in the automotive industry as well. So based on these keywords, then how we're going to enhance the intelligence of automobiles and also more lightweight, so move toward more lightweight automobiles. So these are some of the focus areas of our master plan. Now, having said that, now Paraguay would be starting out from motorcycle manufacturing to move into auto manufacturing. Then for some of the motorcycle manufacturing, now the semi-knockdown type. So they would get the semi-assembled parts from other countries, put them together into automobiles. So this industry is now just being born. And then, so that is what we see on the left-hand side. But then also on the right-hand side, what we see is they also import a lot of used cars, quite aged cars. So starting from agricultural trucks and buses. So you see when you go to the downtown area, then you see a lot of cars that emit a lot of gas. So some say that the last destination for the used cars is Paraguay. So you see that there is a lot of pollution out of these automobiles, and also many of them are low-priced cars. So this is also detrimental to the sophistication of the automotive industry as well. But still, for Paraguay, there has also been a big increase in import of electric vehicles. Now, in this case, electric vehicles here is not just battery vehicles, but also it includes hybrid vehicles as well. But still, we see that for Paraguay, yes, on one hand, we have these very old cars. At the same time, we have these state-of-the-art electric vehicles too. Especially on the right-hand side, you see the electric motorcycles. Now, China is taking up about 99% of the market. Now, what's interesting is that now in Paraguay, now they have made a decision to promote automobile industry as a future growth driver because of the wire harness, this one part. Now, you see the auto part export by Paraguay. Now, 99% of Paraguay's auto part export is just one product, and that is wire harness. Wire harness, you can see this as a bundle of wires that go into the automobile. So this is like the neural network of the automobile. So this is just a bundle of wires, and it plays a very important role in auto. At the same time, it works not only ICE vehicles, but also in electric vehicles as well. And this is one part that cannot be automated. In other words, it requires a lot of human capital, it needs a lot of human labor, and there have to be individuals standing at the line to put together this wire bundle. So this is a very unique component. And many of the plants in bundle, so the THN by Korea, so led by them, and also German and the Japanese companies now, because they can find more stable labor in Paraguay over Brazil. So many of the plants have relocated to Paraguay. And this has also opened Paraguay's eyes to auto industry. So the wire harness is a very important, has been and is still a very important auto component for Paraguay for various reasons. Now, we have been to the Paraguay wire harness plant, and we see that in most cases they would purchase the wires and then process them in the plant. And close to 100% of these wires are imported from Korea. So they would haul them in containers. But now the issue is these basic parts like wires and bolts and nuts. So for these very basic mechanical engineering and electric engineering, so they have yet to develop these engineering techniques, and because of this, they are not sourcing the wires from domestically. So what is important is not just to foster the wire harness industry, but also the downstream and the upstream, for example, the wires, and also there also has to be more investment and efforts to develop the basic scientific and technological education as well. So for Paraguay, it also is quite nearby to large markets like Brazil, and it is abundant in hydropower generation, meaning that they have a rich source of clean energy. This is also quite beneficial in exporting their parts, and it is also, so it places them well in terms of sustainable development, and also labor and labor costs. They are also quite competitive there, but also some of the weaknesses in terms of the electrical engineering or mechanical engineering, so they need to make improvement on them. Then also the paradigm shift in the global automotive industry can be an opportunity. So after this SWOT analysis, then we have also referred to the Korean experience as well. And this is the image that we discussed with the Paraguay civil servants as well as the minister, and they were quite impressed with this. And the point that we are trying to make with this is that it is the private sector that will lead the development of the automotive industry. So on the right-hand side, so whether OEMs or assembly companies or parts companies, so it is the price competitiveness and the quality competitiveness of the private sector, of the businesses, that would lead the development, that would lead the growth of the automotive growth. So that is what we emphasize, that the owners, the leaders of automotive industry would be the private sector. And then what, in terms of the support, what they need is policy and law, infrastructure, R&D, and human resource development. So this is what the government has to provide in terms of support. So based on the Korean experience, this all went into the master plan that we provided. And then now, left is domestic and right is the export trend, and again you see the e-vehicles are increasing very rapidly. So compared to the previous year, now it is actually growing at a 50% CAGR. So you see that the EV growth is a global trend. And now this is the Korean development, a Korean auto industry development master plan that was created in the 1960s, 1970s. So we also explained the Korean master plan, which have two highlights. First is that from the very beginning, we were eyeing the export market, not the domestic market. And because of this, all the technologies, now at that time, so we thought that growth or the export was our way to growth. And we also tried to have domestic development of the technologies. Now, domestic development of technologies, now that was also quite important for Korean growth, and we believed that it was important at that time to try to develop our own technologies instead of importing them all. And also the policy and the legal basis is also very important. So Korea also has various laws tightly knit together, for example, Industrial Technology Innovation Promotion Act, to promote the industrial growth, and also we can provide this legal and regulatory support for certain industries as well. So we have also explained them in detail to Paraguay as well. So Paraguay is also interested in this, especially the technoparks, and they were highly interested in the Korean technopark system, how it is run, how it can be transplanted into Paraguay. But again, this is not just about having a technopark, but we also need to have the legal support. So there is the law called the Industrial Technology Innovation Promotion Act, as well as the Technopark Act. So they also need to have this legal basis. And again, the infrastructure, for example, the Korea Automotive Technology Institute, they were also highly interested in this. We also have the legal basis for this. And now this is an institute that was funded partly by the government, by the automotive manufacturers, and by the auto parts companies. And they were highly interested in how this type of contribution and how this type of investment was made possible. And they were very much interested in how such cooperation and partnership was made possible. And of course, the CATEC itself is having a lot of cooperation with the Paraguay government as well. So we have also incorporated that into the master plan as well. And earlier, so there was also a lot of mention about the R&D, and I also asked him about this. So I heard about the Paraguay R&D budget, and I was a bit confused about the number. I thought that perhaps 10 was missing, but so the concept of R&D was not strong in Paraguay. So from the MOEF, I was also instructed to emphasize the importance of R&D. So we went at great length to discuss the importance of R&D in Korea, and also in Korea how the masters and the PhD, so the highest share of the masters and the PhD in Korea is from the technical side. And so based on this master plan, we also wanted to identify the action plan that was immediately implementable in Paraguay. So we also met up with a lot of companies. So for example, the assembly companies and also parts companies in Paraguay. Now, they want to sell their products as much as possible, but then now, if the government were just automatically give them priority in government procurement, then that would be meaningless. I mean, they have to reach a certain quality threshold. And then also, in order to promote the promising industry and the companies, and how can they streamline the legal system to make that possible? Then also, in terms of the environmental friendly industry, so for example, parts remanufacturing and recycling of the used parts. So we also included plans for that, and also the plan to include techno parks, and also how we can include automotive research institutes as well as accreditation institutes. And then also for the R&D, we need to make sure that there is sufficient budget support, and also we need to develop the human resources. And again, for the future vehicle manpower training projects are necessary, and we need to have sufficient on-site technical manpower re-education project. And also carbon neutrality, or GHG, and how these recent trends or issues are also reflecting and affecting the automotive industry, and especially for the Paraguay latecomer in automotive industry, how can they adjust to these changes? So because of this, the Paraguay government also agreed with this master plan. So afterwards, we are now in the follow-up stage to contribute to the automotive industrial development of Paraguay. So that is also highly meaningful for the Hyundai Institute, and that is all for my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So that was a presentation on the drafting of the master plan for the Paraguay automotive industry. And he mentioned how there were 4 pillars: policy and law, infrastructure, R&D, and human resource development, coming up with many policy recommendations. Now, of course, when we give presentations or the lecture as well, now it was mentioned earlier that Korea has the history of about 50 years in automotive industry, and yes, the success factors were export and also domestic development technology. But of course, things are different from then and now. So, for example, carbon neutrality, digitalization, and GHG. So it is no longer smooth manufacturing from assembly-made ICE vehicles, but then we need to now move on to EVs and hydrogen vehicles. Another difference is that now in the 1960s, we have already had the 10-year domestic development plan. And at that time, there was not much global pressure. But today, if we are to have industrial policies, then there could be global pressure, like from the WTO and so forth. So as we have mentioned earlier, how we are going to adapt to the changes in time. So how we can continue with the domestic development while avoiding international pressure, I believe that would be key to the automotive development.
We're going to invite our last presenter from Korea Road Traffic Authority, senior researcher Sang Yeon-han. He'll talk about the Mozambique case. Hello. The presentation is titled Establishment of Master Plan for Smart Transportation System in Maputo, Mozambique. I am Han Sang-yeon from the Korea Engineering Consultants Corporation from Korea Road Traffic Authority. This is a table of the contents. 30% of the population is concentrated in Maputo, which is leading to a lot of transportation capacity issues, and there was a need for a smart transportation system. This was the background of the project, and based on our ITS experience, we were to provide help for developing a strategy for a smart transportation system and operating system, as well as training and education opportunities. Maputo metropolitan area comprises Maputo, Matola, Mahakene, and Boane. And key roads include N1 Road to Mahakene and N4, as well as N2 for Boana, in a radial manner. As you can see from the map here, Maputo and Matola are becoming more urbanized, and the regional connectivity and mobility are becoming more important. As for the population for Maputo, Maputo province has 2.2 million, Matu C 1.1 million. And population density is 3,750 per square kilometer for Maputo, which is the largest. And the population is expected to grow to 3.5 million by 2030. And Matola population is going to exceed that of Maputo. And 80% of the cars are concentrated in Maputo region. There are more vehicles on the road in Mozambique. We expect traffic congestion to become worse in Maputo region. This is the mass transportation mode for Maputo. There are mostly buses or chapas, but due to aged vehicles and breakdowns, there are issues in terms of intervals as well as route operation. Long-range routes need to be reduced, and intervals between buses should be shortened, and unauthorized operators need to be pulled into the mainstream. If you look at the traffic speed of Maputo, towards Maputo city in the morning and in the afternoon towards the outer direction, there's a slower speed in traffic. And JICA report says that by 2035, there will be more traffic congestion due to an increase of traffic between Maputo and Matola. It is very important that Matola and Maputo bring in a large transportation system and encourage people to take public transit instead of passenger vehicles. Now, JICA established Maputo City Master Plan. A BRT, Metro, LRT, and transport centers were recommended. And also, the World Bank is also going to implement a BRT project. And by establishing a preemptive public transit operation system, it is very important to prepare for the future traffic system. We had a field survey, and we conducted a visit to various organizations, and they said the following. From the government's point of view, they want to have a bus integrated management system and bus-only lanes and legal framework. And from the operator's point of view, maintenance, new car supply, and government subsidies were needed. And across the board, they wanted to have a bus lane roads in order to increase timeliness of operation, and also to put in place a bus operation management system to improve the efficiency in operation. Now, through the field survey, the problems in relation to the public transportation can be classified into 4 different pillars: administration, infrastructure, operation, and digitization. In terms of administration, there is an absence of a public transportation management system. There are issues in terms of non-regular tools. And from the infrastructure's point of view, irregular routes and operation, vehicle issues and breakdowns. And from the operations point of view, there was an absence of available vehicles and parts management and human resource and technology. And from the information point of view, there was not an information management and collection system in place for the bus operation. Based on the understanding of the Maputo, we conducted a SWOT analysis to review the policy direction forward. First of all, the strengths include the Mozambique government's strong commitment to the public transportation business project, and they have a large-scale gas resource development, which would lead to economic development. But the weaknesses include that development spaces are limited compared to the population size, and there's a lack of infrastructure and operation system. From an operation point of view, World Bank, Exim Bank are now getting into ODA projects ever more. And also, there is a possibility for increasing public transportation using natural gas. The threats include natural disasters due to climate change and also financing limitations for sustainable projects implementation. Now, based on the SWOT analysis, we came up with a SWOT strategy based on which we selected key priority tasks for public transportation development. From the SO point of view, new vehicle expansion, bus route realignment. From the ST point of view, ODA expansion, including WB. And for WO, introducing public transport smart system. And from the WT point of view, legal amendment and legislations for public transportation. In relation to that, among Korea's smart ITS, we have a bus management system and bus information system, which enable bus vehicle terminals to receive information from the satellite and provide information back to the citizens and the drivers. Of course, we had initial issues such as a lack of data and also discrepancies in the actual operational data and BMS data. So we had to conduct some functional improvements as a result. And Mozambique as well can introduce bus operation management system to systematically manage their buses, bus fleets, and also to use as a basic data for their public transportation policy. Now, smart bus stations are about increasing the number of hub stations to provide more pleasant waiting space and provide accurate bus arrival information to the bus users. Now, this is Korea's bus-only lane. This was introduced in 1996 to improve on-time performance of the buses. It leads to improved traffic speed and also increase in the number of users. And the semi-public bus system was also introduced in 2004 in order to strengthen the public interest of the buses and also to strengthen the services. And it led to a lot of effects. And as a result, efficient bus lane realignment and public transport onlineness can be secured. And this has to be done from a long-term point of view. Next, funding. With an increase in SOC demand, public facilities such as road and railroads needed to be secured, and efficient management required investment resources. So we had some tax revisions. We came up with a special account in 1993 and revised our laws in relation to the fuel excise tax and transfer. And we also allowed advertisements to be installed on the facilities to use that advertisement for resourcing, for providing resources to the local governments. And of course, to do this, a policy support will be needed, such as introducing special purpose transportation tax. Now, I've talked about the problems from the as-is analysis, and we presented 6 directions for improvement. First, realizing smart administration, improving awareness, improving user convenience, develop database decision-making system, and established state-of-the-art infrastructure and information system operation. As for smart public transportation system, convenient service, efficient operation, and reliable transport administration were defined as key goals, and specific targets include facilitating public transportation use and so forth, and service satisfaction. I talked about management, infrastructure, operation, and information, and these are the concepts for the mid to long term. For the management, we want to identify the operation status of the transportation system and to establish a registration management evaluation system over the long term. As for infrastructure, a bus information system and BIT and bus-only lane will be reviewed to advance the road environment. As for operation, this is to strengthen the capacity of the people and to make the organization more efficient. As for information, this is to establish a basic database and to establish renewal system and to advance the public transportation system. Based on the strategy, in the short term, BMS, BIS, and transport service provider management system were to be introduced, and for the mid to long-term system, BRT, parking management, and automatic toll collecting and crackdown system were defined. As for the development improvement strategy, we presented our views in 4 different sectors here: management, operation, infrastructure, and information. And we also did it across 3 different time zones: short, mid-term, and long-term. This is a diagram that shows how to go about the advancing of the systems. We also identify tasks to address. First, from the operations point of view, we would register the unregistered vehicles and also provide more vehicles and strengthen the information collection system. For that, we recommended that BMS and BIS to be established. It also includes a pilot introduction of the BIT. And for second, accident prevention and operation status analysis and controls were needed on the basis of data. So the type trafography system establishment was to be introduced, and the third is related to the basic data issue. This is establishment of the BMS and BIS for the short term. This includes system establishment for the bus operation and transport information system. 24 months are needed. It includes the establishment of the operation management system, supplying terminals and bus stations. Budget required is $7.7 million. Second task is a short-term project, tachographs. This is to analyze the operational status of the public transportation system, which will require 12 months. It's related to the introduction of the digital tachographs and management system. Total budget required is $4 million. And among the short-term projects, we have a computerization project for public transportation infrastructure and road. This is to ensure scalability of the data utilization. By establishing an information management system, it will require about 18 months. It includes road and road facility database establishment, as is analysis for the bus routes, bus information database. The total budget required is $1.1 million.
대한 사업비는 추정입니다.
These are the estimates for the project. Short-term includes BMS and BIS. A total $12.8 million will be needed for the midterm. It includes various registration system. $34.6 million will be needed over the long-term project. BRT establishment, bus information management system will need to be established. A total of $97 million will be needed. All in all, $145 million of budget will be required. Next is the action roadmaps. Based on the scale and before and after the project, 29 specific targets were defined for 11 different projects. Over the short term, it's about infrastructure building. Midterm, it's about database expansion. And long term, it is about advancing each project. When you carry out these type of projects, you of course come across the biggest hurdle, which is financing. So we recommended that an efficient way of resource financing is secured. For example, you can use ODA, have the free aid, or to have a hybrid way, combining the grant as well as the concessional loans, or use the EDCF loans that is provided by the KXM, or also to secure support from KOICA. In relation to climate change, Maputo has a lot of population, has a lot of old vehicles, and there's a huge emission of carbon. And we expect to see a lot of negative impact from climate change. So eco-friendly policies, which is replacing the bus vehicles to make it more green, and ITS system, and if we encourage more people to take buses instead of passenger vehicles, they would be able to alleviate the impact from climate change by deepening their capacity for managing the old vehicle fleets. And also to come up with the basis for sustainable development, the BMS BIS establishment project, which was proposed for this program, if they're able to make effort to establish an information database and also for the public transportation operation, I'm sure it will become a scalable project to be applied to other type of public transportation development project. Thank you very much, and this concludes my presentation.
예, 감사합니다. 한 박사님께서
Thank you very much. You talked about the smart transportation system, ITS. in the Maputo region in Mozambique. You talked about BIS and BMS and how financing should be done, and you did it across different time zones. It was a very systematic presentation, so thank you. I mean, if you visit these other countries in the development phase, you see cyclists, you have automobiles, and you have passenger vehicles. And we always ask about public transportation in those countries. If you go back to 50s and 60s, I think we all first began our transportation history with public transportation. I think it's really closely related to the culture as well as the temperature around. So we can change this and innovate this to respond to climate change and also to reduce CO2 emissions. I think this is a very critical issue and a big food for thought for many countries.
거기다 두 분께 토론을 부탁드리겠습니다. 먼저
So we have listened to 3 presentations, and now we will move on to the discussion time. So let me first ask Mr. Chang Sun-jang, lead from Global Green Growth Institute. So I believe you may remain seated as you deliver discussion. Yes, good afternoon. I am from GGGI. My name is Chang Sun-jang. I am the lead in transport and sustainable mobility. And right now at GGGI, EV is the major area of cooperation for transport. And now what we have heard so far from the presentation. So yes, from the energy part, I see that there is a clear move toward energy transition. Then in the energy transition, then in terms of the transport, how are we going to enhance the efficiency of fuel, and also how we are going to set the direction for the energy transition. So for this question, then we also had the discussion about transition to EV, which will require legal framework as well as industrial promotion and the need to enhance capability. And of course, it still falls under the transport sector. So for the transport sector to transition to a new area, then how we are going to maintain the link to the existing transport system. So that would also be very important. So we also heard about the ITS, the Intelligent Transport System, and especially for the bus management system. So that was also the focus of the discussion today. So in the end, now for EV to be more actively used, then the linkage to the existing infrastructure will be very important. So what GGGI is currently focusing on is, now for Ethiopia, we are providing the introduction of electric buses, especially in Addis Ababa with the AFD. So this is the French Development Institute. So this is similar to Korea CDCF. So they have allowed loans to introduce electric vehicles in Addis Ababa. And then now for the BRT2 lines to be installed, how they're going to introduce electric vehicles. So we have also done the analysis for the economic social impact of that. And also in the BRT line, if they are to use electric buses, then what is going to be the impact and how we're going to maximize the impact was the main theme of our analysis. And also ITS, the technology itself is highly useful, not only in the private sector, but also for public transport, for public buses as well. And for them, there are some cases of Rwanda, Sri Lanka, and Nepal where we have also done projects. So for ITS and bus, especially with electric buses, so how we're going to apply that to buses. So in this case, the battery management system would be the first area where we can enhance the efficiency. So where we can enhance the efficiency of the management of buses, that can be linked to the ITS, and also the charging infrastructure would be very important. So as people look for gas stations, that itself could be a headache. And if right now charging infrastructure is not sufficient, so given the shortage of that, then how we are going to find them quickly is the key to enhancing convenience of EV users. So then, utilizing ITS, we can provide information to the public about the location of the charging stations. And also utilizing the ITS, we can also manage any breakdowns in the charging infrastructure. So how we can provide them to be linked with the electric vehicles. So that is also one area of study, and we are also seeing the spread of such systems across the world. So there are also projects where GGGI is supporting in different countries. And one last thing is, now for the developing countries, the energy transition and the infrastructure building and transition to EVs. Now, for all of them to be made possible, then they also need to have the appropriate financing. On one hand, the financing can be provided by themselves, for example, through tax revenue, but also another key issue is how we can make sure that there is efficiency in financing, both the mobilization and usage thereof. So then, what we have recently recommended to the Rwandan government from a KSP experience is about the ITMO. So now this is a market mechanism to secure credit, and this is a part of green financing as I see it. So we can utilize ITMO to discuss the funding with donor countries and how to secure the charging infrastructure. So we have also provided consultation regarding this, and with the Rwandan Ministry of Infrastructure, and then also with the Ministry of Economic Planning of Rwanda. And then through them, they submitted the final proposal to the KSP regarding the expansion of ITMO to the Ministry of Economy and Finance of Korea. So I believe that in such projects, what is needed is to have mutual benefit. So not only to share the knowledge of Korea to Rwanda or other countries, but then by doing so, Korea can also transfer its ITMO and earn the credit for GHG reduction. And also based on the experience, then we can also further protect the environment through this type of project. So then I believe that that is the kind of project that we can work on in terms of the system and the knowledge sharing. So if you can further this, then I believe that this can become a very meaningful KSP project. So that is all from me. All right, thank you very much. So then among the three topics, he touched upon the transport and especially the automotive side, I believe. And then what he mentioned is that we are currently now moving into a new paradigm, shifting into a new paradigm. So then they were mostly about two topics. One is about how we can apply the existing infrastructure and build up the infrastructure. And second was more important part, and that is about financing. So one hand could be having local financing, and another is to provide support from KSP. So again, independent financing and then international financing. And in connection to that, he has also introduced some projects from GGGI.
Last but not least, we're going to have Director Yoon Hyun-soo from ECOSIAN. Hello, I'm Yoon Hyun-soo, as was introduced. What I would like to talk about today is the relations between KSP and climate change response. We're now looking at what we need to do to respond to the future. So we cannot help but to talk about climate change. And this was already mentioned during the panel discussion. And as was mentioned by Mr. Chang, I think a lot of discussion is focused on the fact that the countries have announced their NDCs and they've talked about how they want to achieve their carbon neutrality and how to get there. I think that's the critical thing that we need to talk about. As you may be very well aware, after the Paris Agreement, in order to achieve the carbon neutrality goals, all the parties have unveiled their NDCs and they're trying to implement them. But what's important is that by 2050, we have carbon neutrality goal, as is the case for Korea as well. So by 2030, for NDC, compared to 2018, we're going to be reducing our CO2 emissions by about 40%. However, in the process of achieving the NDCs, we may not be able to achieve that goal solely from reductions in Korea, that the reductions are to come from overseas as well through the ITMO projects. This is what we've been talking about, the ITMO projects, that to bring in the credit reductions from overseas. But of course, to facilitate the development of ITMO and to link that to KSP, we cannot do that right away due to various circumstances. But I think that, well, in order to execute ITMO, under the Article 6 guidelines of the Paris Agreement, all countries have to carry out ITMO in the areas that they have unveiled as areas for NDC reductions, NDC goal achievement. We understand that a lot of countries will be making various efforts to achieve their NDC going forward, including ITMO. We heard about Paraguay's example of automotive industry development. If you look at the NDCs from Paraguay, from the transportation sector, one of the key tools is hybrid cars or transition to EV, electrification of automobile sector. The results of KSP, if they're linked as a tool for achieving NDC, I think the project will really pick up greater steam. When we look at the recent examples, for example, from Japan and Germany, they're very much engaged in the development phase of the NDC strategies for developing countries. For example, Germany, they have a coolant project that goes into the refrigeration. It's called RAC, refrigeration and air conditioning, which is also mentioned as a major tool for NDC. If we make use of KSP, I think we can come up with a greater number of KSP projects. And from a policy point of view, what's really critical about ITMO is how to account and how to verify. It's all about MRV, monitoring, reporting, and verification for the CO2 emission reduction. We have a very robust system for MRV in Korea, but that is not the case for developing economies. There are countries that do not have the specific concrete mechanism. So perhaps KSP can move into that direction with a greater number of KSPs implemented. Now, there are a lot of countries that are trying to introduce ETS, emissions trading system. Of course, in Asia, Korea was the first Asian country to introduce and is currently implementing ETS. So in order to respond to climate change and the know-how and institutional experiences that we have accumulated thus far can be transferred through the KSP efforts to other partner countries, and based on which KSPs can be linked further to ITMO projects, and such reductions can be counted towards the NDC. Thank you, and this concludes my discussion. Thank you very much for your interesting remarks. We've talked about transportation, auto, and EPS, and also climate change, carbon emission reduction. Well, we have 40% reduction goal for NDC, and most of that, a lot of that is going to come internationally. And you also suggested a very good idea as to how to link KSP to this initiative. So we've heard from our speakers and commentators over here. Do we have any questions from the floor?
한두 분 정도.
We'll be able to take maybe one or two questions. Please use a microphone.
여기 좀 들어와 있는가요? 한 분 듣고 또 여기서 하나 서류를 받은 게 있는데.
So then, yes, go ahead with your question. We also have some pre-received questions as well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the discussion. Now then, regarding the KSP, now this is the KSP Dissemination Conference, so we are talking about the performance or the outcome out of the KSP, so from the different organizations and the institutes as well. But then now, in terms of the what can be called a control tower, in other words, about the follow-up tasks or the direction to follow. So where are they determined? So I'm just wondering about where the control tower is. So my question is to the professor. Well, I believe that that actually lies outside the scope of the discussion today, so I'm not sure whether I am the right person to discuss anything like the control tower. And also, the representatives here are involved with the project itself, so perhaps they are not in the position to discuss the policy aspect. Perhaps you could take that question to KDI later on. I ask for understanding. We do have a question from the audience, and I believe that that is to Mr. Yoon Hyun-soo about your discussion.
What's the government's policy and the action plans for ESG focus going forward? Can you make it brief, please? Well, as for ESG, the government is currently thinking about mandating the information disclosure on ESG. Starting from 2030, those companies that are listed on KSP, they're going to be mandated to disclose their information in ESG. This trend is not only limited to Korea, but also covers the European region as well as America. 2033 for the United States and 34 from EU for the mandating of the ESG disclosure. I don't understand the intent of your question, but if you're thinking of what you need to do for ESG, from the private sector's point of view, there are a lot of needs and demands from the supply chain. You need to first identify where the needs are and how to measure and how to report, and you need to have a system in place to do that. Thank you. So we don't have much time.
시간 드릴 수가 있나요? 이거 1시 10분인데 혹시 그럼 마지막으로 한 분만 저기.
Yes, we are supposed to finish, but maybe we can just take one last question. Yes, one from the middle. Please use your microphone.
Okay, good afternoon. Sorry, my Korean is not really good, so I will ask the questions in English. My name is Amalia. I'm currently a master degree student in KDI, but I'm also a private sector team at the Green Climate Fund. But my question here is in my position as a student. I have interest in electric vehicles, so maybe this question would relate more to Mr. Jang Woo-sok and Mr. Jang Chang-sun. So what do you think is the most important factor to develop industrial policy for electric vehicle, and what do you think the government role in this case? Thank you.
장창선 리드께 질문이신 것 같은데요. 이제 산업 정.
So then perhaps this question is to Mr. Chang. So then what do you believe is the most important role for the government in coming up with industrial policy? Well then, given that the industry is being reshaped today, then for the businesses as well as the members of these businesses, so we have to make sure that they adapt to these changes. So I believe that that would be the most important focus. So looking at the Korean situation, then we have the Technopark in Ulsan, and there is the Green Tech Technopark. And now this is also being created by KIAT, commissioned by the government. And for the Ulsan Green Tech, their main mission is to support the parts companies in the Ulsan Technopark to be reborn into EV parts companies. So they will support R&D, and they would also help the employees, the workers, to adapt to new change, basically. So by providing this type of infrastructure as well as R&D, the government should provide the workers facing changes to adapt to them. So for example, companies that used to manufacture piston, now piston is going to disappear, then how are they going to support them? For example, if they are to move to another industry, then how are they going to make it possible for them to smooth that transition? I think that is up to the government. Well, thank you very much for the question and answer, and I believe that today's topic appears to be quite specific, but then basically it's about the shift in paradigm into the green transition and energy transition. Now, up until the 60s and 70s, all countries had focused on industrial policies, so that is when the international pressure was less. But then now in the 1980s, with the WTO and the GATT system, now the country's industrial policies, especially in certain industries, are pretty much prohibited. But then now we are faced with new transitions and new industries, and that is why some are saying that we need new industrial policies. So, for example, the semiconductor policy in the U.S. So perhaps that is also linked to what we were saying earlier. So now then, as we shift into a new industrial paradigm, then there are also a lot of controversies and discussions about which ministries are responsible for what. And I believe that the KSP would also be playing an important role in that endeavor as well. And I do not believe that it is necessary for me to summarize all the discussions today, but let us give a big hand to the three speakers as well as the two discussants. Thank you very much, and that brings us to the end of this session.
This concludes Parallel Pens Session 1. It includes all of the sessions for KSP Dissemination Conference. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers for their time today. We would like to thank our offline participants as well as online viewers once again for their precious time. I hope that this conference served as an opportunity to provide you with a lot of insight. Thank you.
잠시 장내 안내 말씀드립니다. 앉아 계신 좌석으로 오찬 도시락이
We're going to serve